Chapter 158. The spring mountains were calm and gentle, like a young girl smiling. The Yi River quietly flowed in front of the grotto, flowing calmly and beautifully, like the great Buddha of Lushna in the grotto, serene and charming. The color of the mountain was a crisp green, like the shallow stream in a stream, clear and shallow. But no matter how hard one tried, they could not see through it. Yang Fan wandered through the forest, as leisurely as if he was walking on the beach of the South Sea. He liked the atmosphere here, relaxed, elegant, and natural. Among the thick, soft leaves, there were already many unknown wildflowers and weeds. Yang Fan suddenly saw a few things that he was familiar with. They were tender, wild vegetables. Looking carefully, there were many tender mushrooms and wild vegetables drilling out of the withered branches and withered leaves. Cat's ear, purslane, penafang grass, shepherd's purse, broom sprouts, thorn buds. Yang Fan squatted down to pick them in high spirits. At first, he felt that there were not enough wild vegetables, but when he really picked them, they soon filled his clothes. Yang Fan was very happy. He could take these wild vegetables back and soak them in boiling water, dipping them in sauce. It would be a very delicious delicacy. Thinking of this, he could not help but think of his sister, the beautiful young girl who was like a green bamboo. Suddenly, he heard a rustling sound. Yang Fan quickly wiped the tears from the corner of his eyes and looked over. It was a little squirrel. The squirrel was holding a pine cone and dragging its fat tail. It stood under the roots of a tree not far away, staring at him with a pair of black eyes. Yang Fan was teased by the little squirrel, and the sadness in his heart dissipated with the wind. He pursed his lips at the little squirrel and called out twice. The little squirrel was startled, threw away the pine cone, and quickly climbed up the tree. When Yang Fan saw its cute appearance, he could not help but laugh. At this time he heard another rustling sound. This time it was definitely the sound of footsteps. Yang Fan turned his head in alarm. Under the forest, a corner of a white dress could be faintly seen in the call. Xiao Man squatted in the grass and dug up wild vegetables. Although she was a beggar when she was young, she didn't know many kinds of wild vegetables. She was too young at that time, and the food she got was not enough to eat. When her mother needed to dig for wild vegetables, she would waste her time catching butterflies and insects. It wasn't until her mother passed away that she and her elder brother depended on each other for survival. It was only then that her elder brother taught her to recognize some wild vegetables. She remembered almost every word that her elder brother had said. She remembered that her elder brother had once said that it was very delicious to use the chicken to make some sauce and dip it in some wild vegetables. She also remembered that when her elder brother had said this, that skinny little face that was always bruised and swollen would reveal an expression of extreme happiness, as well as a hint of desire. Unfortunately, at that time, the two of them didn't have the chance to enjoy such a luxurious meal. It wasn't until she left her elder brother and followed Aunt Pei to Luoyang that she had the chance to eat the delicacy that her elder brother had mentioned. After so many years, she had fallen in love with this taste. However, if she wanted to eat this dish, she could only go to a restaurant to eat or go to the market to buy some wild vegetables and cook it herself. Now, after accompanying Empress Wu to Dragon Gate, she realized that there were so many wild vegetables on the mountain. She could even recognize many of them. As she dug happily, she recalled the times when she and her elder brother would dig wild vegetables and bird nests in the forest when they were young. She felt a warm feeling in her heart. It's Shangguan Wei. Yang Fan squatted in the grass and saw the figure coming. It was Shanghai Wanner. Moreover, she was alone without anyone accompanying her. Yang Fan couldn't help but feel excited. Opportunity. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Should I make a move? No one knew how Shangguan Wanner felt about grass, trees, and forests. Shangguan Wan had been a slave in the palace since she was a child. When she was still a little girl, her mother washed clothes that were as tall as a mountain every day. Everyone in the palace had their own errands to do. When everyone was busy, the young Shangguan Wan Er would secretly leave behind the poems her mother wanted her to recite and run alone to spend time with the grass and insects. She had a deep feeling for plants. She would feel completely relaxed when she saw them. Wandering in the forest, she didn't need to be as cautious as she was in front of Empress Wu. She didn't need to observe Empress Wu's expression at all times and analyze every word she said. She also didn't need to be as dignified and refined as she was in front of the scholars in Hongwen Library. Here, she was completely free. She could run if she wanted to, jump if she wanted to, and sing if she wanted to. The air here was freer than in the palace. It was intoxicating. Empress was getting on in years. Every year after ascending the Dragon Gate, she would need to rest to recover. This period of time was the most relaxing time for Shangguan to wait for the imperial edict. She would always find a time to stroll alone in the green mountains and clear waters, as if immersed in the gentle spring water. She would remove the mask on her face and be herself completely. This year, she was already 25. Wan who had never had romantic thoughts before, was suffering from love. She felt even more depressed, so she was even more addicted to the feeling of wandering alone in the forest. She took a deep breath of the fresh scent of plants and stood still. Through the green leaves, she looked at the river, which was as smooth and bright as a jade belt. Her feelings turned into poetry. A new poem slipped out of her mouth. The air is clear at dawn, and I admire the cherry flowers. The hawksbill turtle is the color of spring and the colored glass ripples. I whistle on the rocks and sing a short song as I climb the pines, unless there's an outsider who passes by. Shanghai one had just said, "Who passes by," when she suddenly heard a rustling sound. Shanghai one turned her head and saw a figure rushing out of the forest, like a cheetah. His 10 fingers were spread out, and he pounced on her. This person was wearing the uniform of the Imperial Army. His face was tightly covered with a cloth, revealing only a pair of eyes. Shanghai one was shocked. She didn't have time to shout before she was pushed down by the person, and she was firmly pressed to the ground. Fortunately, the ground was covered with leaves that had accumulated over the years. It was soft and wouldn't hurt her. Shanghai one was about to shout when a large hand covered her mouth, covering most of her delicate face. Only a pair of frightened eyes could be seen. "Don't shout if you don't want to die." A somewhat hoarse, middle-aged man shouted fiercely. Shanghai one quickly blinked her eyes at him, showing a completely understanding and completely obedient posture. The masked man slightly raised his hand in satisfaction. Shanghai one who was somewhat suffocated, took a deep breath. The horseman said again, "Don't be afraid, I won't kill you." Shanghai one calmed herself down and said angrily, "How dare you? Do you know who I am?" The horseman said, "Of course I know. You are Shangguan Dai Zhao. I'm looking for you. Miss Shangguan, I have something on my mind that I can't get rid of. Only Shangguan Dai Zhao can solve it. As long as you obediently listen to me, once I achieve my goal, I will immediately let you go. I will not go back on my word." Shanghai one fixed her eyes on him. A strange expression slowly appeared on her face. Her cheeks quickly became flushed. She said shyly and angrily, "Yang Fan, you bastard. What the hell do you want to do?" Yang Fan was startled and said, "How did you know it was me?" As soon as he said this, he knew it was bad. When he said this, he forgot to cover his voice. Shanghai one said shyly and angrily, "How did I not know it was you? How could I not recognize that sneaky look in your eyes? You really have eaten a bear's heart and a leopard's courage." Yang Fan pulled down the mask on his face. He was dumbfounded. Shanghai one actually recognized him. What should he do? Shanghai one saw his appearance. Her heart was beating even faster. This stinky boy, he actually took advantage of me walking alone in the mountains and covered his face. She thought about what he said just now. Things like, "I won't kill you," and "I have something on my mind that I can't get rid of." Things like, "Only Shangguan Dai Zhao can solve it." As long as you obediently listen to me, once I achieve my goal, I will immediately let you go. What he wanted to do, was there a need to ask? Although Shanghai Wan was as pure as a piece of white paper when it came to relationships, she was not ignorant of the common knowledge of relationships between men and women. She felt that she had guessed Yang Fan's goal. Her body immediately became hot. She did not know if she was ashamed, angry, resentful, or hateful. Some of the questions that she could not figure out were suddenly cleared up. No wonder he pursued her for a few days. Seeing that her attitude was getting colder, he did not make any moves. It turned out that he had such dirty thoughts. Yang Fan did not know that Shanghai Wan was thinking about the wrong things. When he saw that she had seen through his identity, he was dumbfounded. What to do? She originally planned to take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to force out the whereabouts of Miao Shinka. There were less than 50 to 30,000 imperial guards around the Dragon's Gate. Where would she go to investigate? But now Yang Fan's heart was in a mess. Shanghai Wan was firmly pressed against his body. Feeling his strong and masculine body, that faint masculine smell, her heart was dizzy. She became more and more embarrassed and annoyed. A strange feeling that she had never felt before was like a warm little mouse scurrying around in her body, making her uncomfortable and afraid. Shanghai Wan's face was red, and she shouted in a low voice, "You bastard! Still not letting me go. You, where are you grabbing?" Ah! Yang Fan then came back to his senses. Just now when he pounced on Shanghai Wan, he covered her mouth with one hand and stuck his other hand on her shoulder. Because his identity was seen through by her, he lifted his hand to pull off the cloth. When he put it back, he placed his hand on her chest. Because he was at a loss and did not know what to do next, he did not notice at all. At this time, after being shouted at by Shanghai Wan, Yang Fan then came back to his senses. He felt that the edge of his palm was smooth and soft. The texture was rich, but it was not loose. The softness was extremely elastic. His face could not help but heat up, and he quickly raised his hand. Shanghai Wan saw that his cheeks were slightly red, and her face was even hotter. She wanted to struggle, but his body was firmly pressed against her. Their abdomens were pressed against each other, and their hips were kissing. When she moved a little, a strange feeling suddenly made her whole body go limp. It was as if her arm was being pressed down in her sleep. It was so numb that she could not use any strength. Shanghai Wan was embarrassed and angry as she said, "You still not getting up? Get up?" At this time, Yang Fan really did not know what to do. At this time, a clear and cold female voice shouted, "Thief! How dare you?" Chapter 159. With a chonglang sound, there was the sound of a sword being unsheathed. Yang Fan hurriedly turned his head and saw Siamuin standing under a tree not far away. Her willowy eyebrows were raised, and her almond-shaped eyes were wide open. A long sword like the autumn waters was unsheathed and pointed straight at his back. The front of her lapel was falling down, followed by a lot of freshly picked wild vegetables. "It's you!" When Siamuin saw Yang Fan's appearance clearly, she couldn't help but be shocked. She had just picked a lapel full of wild vegetables and excitedly came out of the forest. She wanted to go back and cook them well so that she could taste them with Gao Ying, Lan Yiqing, and a few other close friends. Unexpectedly, when she came out of the forest, she saw a guard pressing down on a struggling woman. At first, she thought that it was an unruly palace guard who was having an affair with a palace maid. But when she saw the woman's appearance clearly, she couldn't help but be shocked. This woman was Shangguan Dai Zhao. Xia Muin immediately unsheathed her sword and prepared to save her. Unexpectedly, when Yang Fan turned his head, she jumped in fright. Out of the requirements of her duty, of course, she should save Shanghai Wan. Moreover, she hated men who bullied and raped women. If such a man fell into her hands, he would definitely not have a good ending. But the man in front of her was her savior. Xiao Man had been homeless since she was a child and lived a hard life. She was used to the fickleness of human nature and the fickleness of the world. So if someone treated her well, she would remember it in her heart, not to mention a life-saving grace. However, this person was not only a shameless perverted thief, but also her savior. How should she choose? When Yang Fan saw Xie appear, he knew that the situation was hopeless. He secretly sighed, and without saying anything, he jumped up and wanted to run away. People were emotional creatures. Not to mention that Shangguan Wan and Xie were both beautiful and lovable girls. It was already difficult for him to lay his hands on them. Moreover, after spending so much time together, he had developed some feelings for them. How could he bear to lay his hands on them? Moreover, Xie martial arts might not be as good as his. But in a situation where Xie was prepared, it would not be easy for him to kill her even if he wanted to. Once Xie turned around and ran or shouted for the other guards, he would be surrounded. Right now, Yang Fan only wanted to escape. But once he escaped, he would have to hide and hide. If he wanted to take revenge, he would have to spend a lot of effort. As soon as she saw that he wanted to escape, Shanghai Wanner straightened her back and suddenly sat up. She shouted in a sweet voice, "You stop right there!" Yang Fan's body stopped. He first looked at Xie with vigilance. Then he slightly leaned his body to one side and gathered his strength under his feet. Only then did he cast his gaze on Shanghai Wanner. Shanghai Wanner stood up. She slightly lowered her head and combed her slightly messy hair. In fact, her white gown was already wrinkled. There were some dried leaves on the back of her lapel. Even if she combed her hair, it would be difficult to cover up her embarrassment. But the charm and grace that she had cultivated for many years made her movements still elegant and noble. At first glance, it was easy to overlook the situation on her body. "Xiaoman, you can withdraw." At Shanghai Wanner's words, Xie and Yang Fan's eyes widened at the same time. Xie hesitantly said, "Shangguan is waiting to be summoned." He. Shanghai Wanner slightly lowered her flushed cheeks. She continued to comb her hair with trembling fingers. She forced herself to be calm and said, "You misunderstand. I was not careful when I was walking. I accidentally fell down. Bodyguard Yang wanted to help me, but he accidentally tripped over the wisteria. Cough. Well, you go and do your own things. This matter, by all means, do not mention it to anyone." Yes, this lowly officer obeys." Xie big black eyes were full of suspicion, but even the person involved had said so. What else could she say? Xie secretly muttered. She returned her sword to its sheath. She glanced at the scattered wild vegetables on the ground with distress. Only then did she fly away. Yang Fan stood there full of doubt. Why did Shanghai Wanner help me cover up? Yang Fan was puzzled. He looked at Shanghai Wanner with doubt. Shanghai Wanner lowered her head. She took a deep breath and gathered her courage. Step by step, she walked in front of him. She walked very slowly. The tips of her feet gently lifted and then gently fell back down. It was as if she was afraid that she would break the thick leaves on the ground. Because of this, her body appeared even more graceful and graceful. She stopped in front of Yang Fan. She hesitated for a moment. Then, she slowly raised her face. When she raised her head, a strange, captivating redness appeared on her cheeks. Her pair of eyes that were as gentle as spring water were somewhat erratic. But in the end, she still bravely met Yang Fan's gaze. She stared at him and softly asked, "Why did you do this?" "Why did I do this? Can I tell you my reason?" Yang Fan thought. The corner of his mouth slightly revealed a helpless, bitter smile. Shanghai Wanner saw his helpless smile. It was as if she could clearly see his restless feelings. Her heart softened. She gently lowered her head and softly said, I know you like me, but how can you be like this? I don't like it. Huh? Yang Fan's breath was stuck in his throat. His face immediately turned red. He never thought that his coveting for her had already been discovered by her. But her understanding was actually like this. Shanghai, Wanner gathered her courage. She suddenly broke through this layer of window paper. Although her face became even hotter, her mood suddenly became a lot more relaxed. She had lived for 25 years. She had never had this kind of experience and feeling. A man that she didn't hate, actually liked, not only dared to boldly and bluntly confess to her, but in order to obtain her, he even dared to use this kind of method. She should have been very disgusted by this, but she didn't know why. Right now, she only had a kind of drunken feeling. Her head was dizzy and she couldn't think of anything. For 25 years, this lonely woman in the palace had always longed for love, but no one had ever dared to confess to her. The thing that was the easiest for other women to obtain was a kind of extravagant hope for her. But now, Yang Fan's actions actually made her feel overwhelmed by the favor he was showing her. So, being liked by someone is this kind of feeling. Shanghai Wanner felt both scared and a little curious. There was also a kind of indescribable excitement. She hung her head and waited for a long time. She didn't hear Yang Fan speak. She couldn't help but quietly raise her head again. She just happened to see Yang Fan's slightly red cheeks. His face was very young and very handsome. When it was red in Shanghai Wanner's eyes, there was a kind of very immature and bashful feeling. He was different from those noble young masters. He was also different from those scheming and astute civil and military officials. He was even more incomparable to those old and useless people in Hong Wenguan who shook their heads and recited poems all day. He was as fresh as the Yi River at the foot of the mountain. He was as young and tender as the new shoots of the green trees on the mountain. Occasionally he would bare his fangs, displaying his wild nature that made people's hearts palpitate. He is younger than me by a few years. Thinking of this, Shanghai Wanner's heart that was bathed in the river of love couldn't help but tremble. She suddenly felt touched, and a kind of motherly love welled up in her heart. She couldn't bear to make things difficult for this little husband. He was still young. It was inevitable that he would be impulsive and make mistakes. Actually, his nature was very good. Thus, Shanghai Wanner softly comforted him. "All right, you don't need to be afraid and don't be embarrassed. This time, I won't blame you and I won't look into it. In the future, you must not." She hadn't finished speaking when Yang Fan suddenly lifted her chin and kissed her. Shanghai Wanner's eyes suddenly opened wide. Her face was full of shock. Yang Fan was really aroused. Shanghai Wanner was not like Li Lingyue, who could dazzle people with just a glance. But her elegant temperament, bright feeling, and scholarly aura made her belong to the kind of woman who was exceptionally good to look at. Even if you read her for a lifetime, you wouldn't be able to get enough of her. If Princess Taiping was the sun, then Shanghai Wanner was the moon. The sun was sometimes warm, sometimes it was warm, sometimes it was blazing like fire. The 4 seasons were changeable. If you looked at it for too long, it could dazzle your eyes. It had its own kind of lofty majesty that couldn't be violated. And the moon, no matter if it was curved like a hook or round like a jade plate, its brilliance was always bright and soft. If the sun and the moon were side by side, the first thing you would notice would always be the sun. But the elegant and tranquil moonlight would eventually steal your eyes without you noticing. Yang Fan didn't know why he had impulsively kissed her. Perhaps it was because her gentle voice had stirred up a feeling that had been suppressed in his heart for a long time, stirring his heartstrings. Perhaps it was because he had unknowingly fallen in love with this woman who was as bright as the moon. Right now, he just wanted to hold this lovely woman in front of him tightly and deeply kiss her. The young man would do it when he thought of it, so he kissed her. Soft lips, fragrant and smooth tongue. The feeling of ecstasy, it turned out that the feeling of kissing was actually this sweet. Last time, Princess Taiping's kiss was just a shallow taste. Moreover, he was in an accident at that time, so the feeling was far less profound than this time. Yang Fan immediately liked this kind of feeling. In particular, Shanghai Wanner's status was so noble, but she was dominated and controlled by him. Her lips were slightly opened, and her tongue was passively sucked by him. She was so clumsy that she didn't know how to react. This made this young man produce a kind of overbearing intoxication. Shanghai Wanner's voice abruptly stopped. She was shocked by this man's overbearing manner. Her delicate body was so stiff that she couldn't move. Her body seemed to explode, and even her soul didn't know where it floated to, until Yang Fan's tongue entered her mouth and sucked the tip of her tongue. She woke up and suddenly pushed Yang Fan away. How can you be like this? I don't like it, Shanghai Wana stuttered as she finished speaking. She lifted her skirt and ran away, looking at her flustered appearance. She didn't have the demeanor of someone who could weigh the world and the internal affairs of the Tang dynasty. Chapter 160. 7 miles east of Luoyang, Golden Grain Garden. In the Western Jin dynasty, the rich man Shi Chong once built a villa here. The garden was built according to the terrain. A clear stream flowed in the garden, and the sound of water gurgled. According to the shape of the mountain and the water, the garden was built and the lake was dug. Within dozens of miles there were pavilions and pavilions, high and low, and it was extremely magnificent. Now Shi Chong was long gone. His beautiful concubine Green Bead committed suicide for him, and the small building where she died had already become a speck of dust in history. The only thing that had not changed was the beautiful scenery here. In the 3rd month of spring, the peach blossoms were dazzling, the willows were curling up, the pavilions and trees were setting off each other, the butterflies were dancing among the flowers, and the birds were chirping on the branches. It was like a paradise on earth. There were still many villas built by the rich and powerful here, as a place to enjoy the spring scenery and relax. The rich princess also built a garden here, which was quiet and elegant, different from the common world. Usually, there were only a few servants guarding here, but now there were many maids walking around. It seemed that the rich princess had come to the garden for a spring outing. However, the owner of this garden was not the rich princess, nor was it the children of the rich princess, but the gentleman in white that Tin Ano served. The rich princess liked luxury and often used expensive gifts to please Empress Wu, and made friends with Shangguan Wanner, Princess Taiping, and other Empress Wu's trusted aides and the nobles in the court. She spent a lot of money on socializing. The salary of a princess was limited, and a princess who lived in an environment where Li Tang's royal family could be destroyed at any time could not have many ways to make money. The rich princess often presented expensive gifts to Empress Wu, often invited the nobles in the court, and often put on extravagant displays. Where did the money come from? This gentleman in white was her sugar daddy. No wonder the gentleman in white could be half of her home, and even turned from guest to host, and became the owner of this villa. Inside the small building, the zither players and musicians behind the folding screens had already left. The dancers dancing on the red carpet in front of the hall had already left. There were only 2 tables in front of the hall, and the people behind the tables were still there. Sitting behind the main seat was a young master, dressed in a snow-white robe. Not far away from him was a green-clothed, delicate, and lovely Tin Ano. Shinmu sat behind a few tables at the side. He was still wearing a turban and a green robe with a round collar. Yang Xuerao, on the other hand, had changed her attire today. She was wearing a dark green light gauze gown and a pleated skirt embroidered with watery mist and green grass patterns. Her waist was tied with a light blue silk ribbon into an elegant butterfly knot. Her hair was casually tied into a loose bun with a light purple sandalwood hairpin inserted diagonally. This kind of attire was naturally much more gorgeous than the thistle hairpin and cloth skirt at the Tianjin Bridge, but it did not seem to be as charming as that day when she stood at the bow of the ship. This kind of feeling was very wondrous, like a wild flower full of vitality. If you insist on moving it into a pot or onto a dressing table in an elegant room, it would not be as stunning as letting it grow in the wilderness. Shinmu was actually a fake name, just like the gentleman in white, who was called Young Master Jiang by Shinmu. His surname was naturally also fake. So be it. Young Master Jiang said indifferently, Wu Mei's ascension to the throne is already unstoppable. Rather than a mantis trying to stop a chariot, it is better to lend her a helping hand and help her ascend the throne earlier. This will instead leave behind some firewood for Li Tang. Shen Mu said, "Once Empress Wu ascends the throne, young Master Jiang cut him off." So what if Wu Mei has not ascended the throne yet? The more we obstruct her, the more she will use the descendants of the commoners to suppress us aristocratic families. It is better to do the opposite. She is already an old woman, and none of the Wu family's descendants are capable. Right now, we only need to wait and see. When the time comes, we will lend a little help and easily change the world. Young Master Jiang said proudly, "The world will always change, but the heavenly Tao will not." We, the aristocratic families, use the scriptures as our foundation, which is equivalent to grasping the foundation of the country. Even if the country is destroyed and the emperors and generals are replaced, they will still need to use us. What is there to be afraid of? Listening to his words, the two's discussion was nearing its end. The dishes on the table in front of young Master Jiang were barely touched. On the other hand, Shen Mu's table to the side was a mess of cups and plates. Chicken bones, fish bones, alpacas, and camel hooves were scattered everywhere. Shen Mu picked up a piece of gelatinous and delicious bear paw and stuffed it into his mouth, chewing it deliciously. Seeing this, young Master Jiang lowered his head and covered his mouth with a handkerchief. He coughed softly to hide the disgust on his face. Yang Shuarao glared at Shen Mu reproachfully. She took a clean white handkerchief and gently wiped the soup that spilled from the corner of his mouth. Shen Mu smiled. When Shen Mu first heard of young Master's plan, I was worried that I would play with fire and burn myself. Today, I rushed to Luojing and personally listened to young Master's overall plan. My heart is finally at ease. Young Master is talented and resourceful. Shen Mu sincerely admires you. With young Master guarding Luojing, nothing will go wrong. Young Master Jiang said arrogantly, "With my plan, nothing will go wrong. However, there are many things that it is not convenient for my obvious sect to do. I specially called you here because there are some places where your hidden sect can show off your skills. Wu Mei's ascension to the throne is imminent. Your people must cooperate with my actions at all times." Young Master Jiang glanced at him and said, "This courtyard is the princess's courtyard. It is quiet and safe. You can stay here." Shen Mu smiled. "Thank you, young Master. I have already arranged my own accommodation in Luojing. I can settle down tomorrow. This courtyard is the princess's courtyard after all. It is more eye-catching. I will only stay here for a night." Young Master Jiang said indifferently, "Up to you." He stood up and walked behind the screen. He did not look at Shen Mu again, nor did he look at the troublemaker beside him. Shen Mu was just a disciple of a side branch. That woman was originally a wine hostess in Chang and City. She had a lowly status and was not worthy of his attention. Shen Mu did not stand up. He only smiled and said, "Young Master, take care." Tin Ano stood up, smiled, and nodded at them. He then followed behind young Master Jiang and left. Yang Shirao wrinkled her nose and said to Shen Mu, "This guy with a coffin-like face is the young Master Jiang you were talking about? What a condescending look." Shen Mu smiled. "Why, don't you feel that he is elegant like a dragon among men?" Yang Shuarao held her stomach and made a nauseating gesture. She curled her lips and said, "Such an arrogant and repulsive guy can be called a dragon among men?" She glanced at the almost untouched food on young Master Jiang's table and said, "Look at his half-dead appearance. He eats like a chicken. What a waste of a table of delicacies." Shen Mu said, "You don't know this. This young Master Jiang has a serious obsession with cleanliness since he was young. If he sees someone spitting, he will vomit for a long time. Therefore, when he goes out, he rarely rolls up the curtains because he is afraid of meeting unclean passers-by. Just now, I must have eaten too much and affected his appetite." Yang Shuarao suddenly said, I was wondering why you look like a reincarnated, hungry ghost today. You did it on purpose, didn't you? Shinmu winked at her and said with a smile, I was also curious and wanted to see how clean he is. I heard. Shinmu looked around and said in a low voice, I heard that this person's obsession with cleanliness has reached an unimaginable level. Even when a man and a woman are having sex, he feels disgusted when touching a woman's body. After he married his wife, he still slept alone and never slept with her. Later on, in order to continue the family line, he had no choice but to have sex with his wife a few times. After sex, he would wash for 4 to 6 hours and change water 7 to 8 times. To him, it's like he's being tortured. Yang Shuarao said in disbelief, There is actually such a strange person in the world. Shinmu pinched her plump buttocks and said with a low laugh, So, you should be glad that your husband does not have such a strange hobby. Otherwise, you will be a widow. Let's go. I am a little tired from the journey. Let's go back to the room and rest. Yang Shuarao winked at him and said in a sweet voice, Just rest? Shinmu pretended to be surprised and said, What else can we do other than rest? We came all the way from Chang into here. My wife, don't you feel tired? Yang Shuarao said angrily, Let's go. Let's go back and rest. If you dare to have any ideas on me later, I will bite off your penis. The court meeting was held on the 3rd day after Wu Zetian entered the Dragon Gate. The court meeting was held in the stone building of Xiangshan Temple. In order to avoid unnecessary travel between Luoyang and the Dragon Gate Mountain, the Empress decreed that officials who did not have any important affairs did not have to go to Xiangshan Temple to attend the court meeting. Therefore, there were not many people attending the court meeting today. Yang Fan patrolled below the stone building with his saber. The architecture here was different from the palace. In addition, there were no idle people in the temple or even the entire Dragon Gate Mountain other than monks. There were Jin Wu guards stationed outside, so the security was not very heavy. He also did not need to hold his halberd and stand on the narrow stone steps to go up the building. Wu Zetian slowly walked over. Today, she had also changed into men's clothes. Behind her, there were no palace maids fanning her, and many guards of honor. It seemed that in this mountain, everything was simple for her, and she was much more relaxed. Wu Zetian, who had changed into men's clothes, still had a fair and delicate complexion. However, it was not as good as when women wore makeup to hide their age. Shanghai Wan who was wearing a round collar robe and a soft-legged headgear, helped her up the stone steps step by step. After more than a dozen stone steps, when she reached the platform where Yang Fan was standing, Wu Zetian was already a little out of breath. Shanghai Wan considerately helped her to stop and let her catch her breath. The civil and military officials patiently followed behind. From the platform down, from the stone steps to the stone path under the shade of the trees, they formed a long line. When Shanghai Wan helped Wu Zetian up the stairs, her eyes were carefully looking at the ground, afraid that if she was not careful, she would trip the Empress. Only when she stood still on the platform did she raise her head. As soon as she raised her head, she saw Yang Fan. Yang Fan was standing on the side of the platform with a saber in hand. A pair of bright eyes was staring at her. Shanghai Wan was shocked. She quickly turned her head and looked away in a panic. Yang Fan looked at the side of her face that was as pink as egg white. He watched a crimson tide climb from her ears to her cheeks, until the jade-like face turned into a bright red agate. The love in Yang Fan's heart was like a tide, overflowing layer by layer. This woman is really very cute. Chapter 161. Being stared at by Yang Fan, Shanghai Wan's chest rose and fell more intensely, and her breathing became more rapid. She seemed to be panting more heavily than Wu Zetian next to her. Wu Zetian stood still. She felt that after climbing a dozen steps, her legs were sore and she was short of breath. She couldn't help but feel sad. Alas! After all, I'm getting old. I've only walked a few steps, and suddenly seeing Shanghai Wan's flushed face and rapid breathing, Wu Zetian was in a good mood. She puffed out her chest and said, Wan is so young, but she's even worse than me. It seems that it's not because I'm getting old, but because the stone steps here are too steep. Shanghai Wan restrained herself for a long time. Finally, she couldn't help but quietly turn her head and quickly glance at Yang Fan. It was just a glance, like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. His eyes immediately moved away like a startled deer, and then, as if there was a magnet attracting her, she slowly moved back after several confrontations like this. Shanghai Wan finally stopped hiding. On her pretty face, there was a kind of indescribable beauty in her eyes. She stared at Yang Fan with a hint of annoyance and joy, and then slightly lowered her head. In the shimmering light, there was a hint of spring, like the willow branches on the branches rippling in the wind. Xie Xiaoman was dressed in a robe with a leather belt around her waist. She didn't look like she was carrying any weapons. Today, she and Gowing were not accompanying the Empress, so they were only acting as outer guards. From her vantage point, she could clearly see Yang Fan and Shangguan Wan flirting with each other. Xie Xiaoman's last shred of doubt finally vanished. It turned out that they really had feelings for each other. In this case, there was really no need for her to fight for justice. But when he was sure that Yang Fan and Shangguan Wan were really in love with each other, his prejudice against Yang Fan disappeared, and he began to worry about his savior again. Shangguan Dai Zhao is of such a high status. How can you and her be together? Wu Zetian rested for a while and then continued to walk into the stone building. Shanghai Wan gave Yang Fan a deep look, calmed herself down, and helped Wu Zetian up the steps. Although it was just a little flirting, Wan Er's heart was as sweet as honey. That kind of indescribable joy was something she had never experienced before. People often say that women are the most beautiful when they are in love. Wan was like that right now. Almost in an instant, her skin, which was as white as the moon, became even more beautiful. There was a faint red glow in her white skin. Wu Zetian entered the stone building and took her seat in the court. The outside of the building became quiet. Gowing glanced at Yang Fan with hidden bitterness. Her idol seemed to have suddenly become less charming when she found a lover. Xie Xiaoman thought about the unattainable status of Shanghai Wan and felt that she had an obligation to admonish her savior, so she gathered her courage and walked towards him. Ahem. Xie Xiaoman walked to Yang Fan's side and pretended to look left and right. Then she coughed softly. Yang Fan looked straight ahead and did not pay attention to her. Xie Xiaoman leaned back against the stone railing, stole a glance at him, and coughed twice. Yang Fan slowly turned around and said with a smile, "Xie Dui, have you caught a cold? If you are not feeling well, you might as well ask for a leave and go back early to rest." "You!" Xiaoman glared at him fiercely, then lowered her voice and said, "Come here. I have something to say to you." "Oh, what do you want to say, Captain?" Yang Fan said as he leaned forward. Xie Xiaoman, uncomfortably, took a step back and frowned. "Why are you so close? It's not like I can't hear you." Yang Fan chuckled, stood up straight, and said, "Please speak, County Commandant." "Well, this." Xie Xiaoman looked around and covered her mouth with her hand. "That, you like Shangguan Dai Zhao, don't you?" Yang Fan rolled his eyes, nodded, and said, "Yes, why?" Xie Xiaoman said, "Ahem. This. Shangguan Dai Zhao is gentle, elegant, knowledgeable, and beautiful. She is an outstanding woman." Yang Fan nodded. Yes. It's rare that Miss Xiaoman has the same opinion as me." Xie Xiaoman rolled her eyes at him and said, "But Shangguan Dai Zhao is the Empress's favorite. The Empress can't live without her. I'm afraid she won't let her leave the palace to marry and have children." "Oh!" Xie Xiaoman glanced at him and mustered up her courage to continue. "Even if the Empress were to show mercy and allow Shangguan Dai Zhao to marry and have children, with Shangguan Dai Zhao's status, she would only marry a noble family or an important court official." Yang Fan looked at her strangely. "Then what does Xie Dui mean?" Xiaoman felt a little guilty. Shangguan Dai Zhao used to be surrounded by hundreds of beauties in the kingdom of fragrance. But she had been so critical of him. Now that he had turned over a new leaf, she came to break them up. But she really felt that a guard like Yang Fan was not a good match for Shangguan Dai Zhao. If she forced herself to be with Shangguan Dai Zhao, she would get into trouble sooner or later. Thinking of this, Xiemuwen was a little embarrassed and said, "I mean, cough, cough, you see, you're my savior. I, Xiemuwen, am not someone who doesn't know how to be grateful. I can't just watch you, huh? I mean, in fact, you and Shangguan Dai Zhao, is not very suitable. And once this matter is known by the Empress, you may be killed. Oh, so I think you should be more rational. Don't be delusional." Yang Fan said with a smile that was not a smile, "I have always been puzzled. Why is it that no matter what I do, County Commandant Xie always wants to break us up? Now, I finally understand." Xie Xiaoman asked curiously, "What do you understand?" Yang Fan said, "Could it be that Miss Xiaoman is doing this because you like me?" Xie Xiaoman said, "Ah." Yang Fan said, "You see, you also said that I'm your savior. The best way to repay a savior is to devote yourself to me. Besides, you are not happy that I am with the palace maids. Now that I am with Shangguan Dai Zhao, you are not happy. Isn't it obvious?" Xie Xiaoman said, "What do you mean?" I am a little confused." Yang Fan said with a straight face, "County Commandant Xie, I know you like me. In fact, I quite like you too. How about this? After Shangguan Dai Zhao and I become husband and wife, I will take you as my concubine. You see, a prince can take a concubine. With Shangguan Dai Zhao's gentle personality, she will not stop me. Just wait for a few years, okay?" Xie Xiaoman was so angry that she was tongue-tied. Her face was red. "Ba ba ba. In your dreams, my good intentions are treated as ill intentions. Which eye of mine fell for you? Even if I can't get married, I will never marry a stinking monk, a dead scoundrel, a pervert, a pervert." Yang Fan picked his ears and pretended to be happy. He smiled leisurely and said, "The sound of nature is really nice to hear." Xie Xiaoman was even angrier. "Shameless pervert, despicable and shameless, treacherous and filthy. Xiaoman, hurry up and enter the hall." Xie Xiaoman was cursing to her heart's content when she suddenly heard Gao Ying calling her from afar. Turning her head to look, she didn't know when Gao Ying had already arrived at the entrance of the stone building and was waving at her from afar. Xie Xiaoman knew that Gao Ying must have summoned her from the palace hall. She glared at Yang Fan and angrily ran up the stairs. Yang Fan looked at her back and smiled without saying a word. This little girl was really interesting. She was obviously an innocent little girl, but she always wanted to be a big sister who liked to worry for others. Xie Xiaoman entered the stone building. After a short while, he saw her and Gao Ying hurrying out of the stone building. The two of them looked serious. When they passed by him, they didn't even look at him. The two quickly went down the stone steps. After a while, the general of the left guards of Jin Wu, Qiu Shinji, also came out of the stone building with a serious expression. Neigh! A horse neighed. Yang Fan turned his head and saw Xiemuwen and Gao Ying in military uniforms, each riding a fine horse. They had just stopped at the bottom of the stone steps when a large group of imperial guards rushed over. Qiu Shinji quickly walked down the stone steps. An imperial guard brought a horse over. Qiu Shinji turned over and mounted the horse. Accompanied by Xiemuwen and Gao Ying, they left. The Dragon Gate Mountain was quiet at night. Tens of thousands of people were scattered inside, but they couldn't cause any trouble. The soldiers didn't know what happened during the morning court, and they didn't bother to ask. Especially the soldiers who were stationed in the palace for a long time. They had developed the habit of pretending to be deaf and dumb. The daily life of the soldiers stationed in the palace was more boring than that of the eunuchs in the palace. Being in the mountain was much more comfortable than being in the palace with strict rules. especially with the tens of thousands of troops of the Jinwu guards surrounding the Dragon Gate Mountain. Their daily tasks were even more leisurely. The Dragon Gate Mountain was a royal garden, and ordinary people were not allowed to enter. Therefore, there were all kinds of wild animals active on the mountain. The guards used all kinds of methods to catch many wild animals such as pheasants, rabbits, ducks, and snakes. With a simple process, they could make delicious food. In the evening, the guards built a bonfire in the mountain and roasted the delicacies of the wild animals. Apart from not being able to drink or sing loudly, it was just like a scene of a spring picnic. Yang Fan was also among them. He held a wooden stick in his hand and gently turned a wild rabbit over the fire. The rabbit meat was almost cooked, and the fat dripped into the fire, sizzling. The red light of the fire reflected Yang Fan's young face. There was a mysterious and sweet smile on his lips. This young man, who was experiencing his first awakening of love, finally had the shadow of the opposite sex in his heart. This was a very novel experience for him. On the night of the Lantern Festival, Princess Taiping's kiss opened a crack in his heart. But strictly speaking, that was not love. He never had delusions of marrying a princess, and it was not because he was aroused that he took the initiative to kiss her. But at this moment, the Shanghai one lingering in his heart gave him a completely different feeling. He liked the warm feeling of having a woman in his heart. Looking at the red flame, he even fantasized that if he could get rid of his enemy without anyone noticing and maintain his current identity, then one day he would find his sister and marry Warner, whom he admired. A family of 3, happy and harmonious, how wonderful that would be. Chapter 162. Hey, what are you thinking? Look at how happy you are. A guard next to him nudged him with his shoulder. The man was tearing into a fat pheasant as he mumbled. The captain is asking you a question. Didn't you just come back from Nanyang? What's it like over there? Yang Fan saw that everyone was looking at him and hurriedly smiled. Our place is very different from here. Once you go out, you can see the endless sea. Whether it's day or night, you can always hear the sound of waves. The wind there smells fishy when it blows on your face, and you can smell it in your nostrils. Yang Fan told him the story of Southeast Asia. Many of these guards had never seen the sea in their entire lives, so they were very interested in the customs of the South Sea. Yang Fan said, "The water there is very clear. The water is a few feet deep, so clear that you can clearly see the sandy beaches, reefs, colorful corals, and all kinds of fish at the bottom of the sea. There are also many sea turtles on the beach. The sea turtles will dig a hole in the beach and bury their eggs in it, letting the sun shine on them to hatch the hatchlings. When the hatchlings are born, they will automatically rush to the sea. There is a large, densely packed area." Everyone was listening with great interest when County Commandant Zhu Bin appeared with a frightening face. "Look at the time, and you're still making a racket here. Who allowed you to do this? If anything goes wrong, you won't be able to bear the consequences. Disperse, disperse, all of you disperse." A captain went up to greet him with a smile and whispered a few words. Then he wrapped the leg of a roasted wild duck with leaves and stuffed it into Zhu Bin's hand. Zhu Bin snorted and swaggered off with the wild duck. The captain heaved a sigh of relief and waved his hand. All right, everyone disperse. Yang Fan, stay behind and extinguish the fire. Be careful not to cause a forest fire." Everyone took their unfinished food and dispersed. Yang Fan was the last to leave. He extinguished the fire and covered the ashes with some soil. Only then did he carry the roasted rabbit and slowly walk back. In the distance, Wu Zetian's bedroom was brightly lit. Yang Fan knew that Shanghai Warner was also living there. Yang Fan stopped and looked at the cluster of lights in the distance, sighing softly. Once the window of feelings was opened, the mountain would no longer be a mountain, and the water would no longer be water. One would have an additional layer of cognition and feelings than before. Since he was young, he had been carrying too many things in his heart. For a 17-year-old boy, this was undoubtedly a little too heavy. He always carried it alone, and he could only carry it alone because he had no one to share his burden with. Now he suddenly hoped to have a gentle embrace to lean on, a gentle woman to listen to him pour out the fatigue in his heart, or nothing at all, just snuggling in that embrace and sleeping soundly. There was no doubt that Shanghai Wanner was now the person he longed for. The spring night breeze on the mountain was still a little chilly. A gust of wind blew over and woke Yang Fan up from his thoughts. He looked back at the bonfire that had just been buried and could no longer see the slightest bit of light. So he prepared to return to the barracks to sleep. When he raised his head, he saw a figure in the distance. The night was vast, and from where he was, he could see the round moon in the sky as big as a wheel. In front of the moon was a big tree, and that person was sitting on the horizontal branch of the tree, looking at the moon and drinking alone. The wind blew her long hair, and it fluttered. The silhouette of her body was very beautiful. Under the bright moon, the edges of her body were covered with a layer of mellow luster, so even the outline of her facial features could be easily recognized. This jade-like person was Xie Xiaoman. Yang Fan walked over curiously and circled around the forest until he reached the tree. The rustling sound of footsteps could be heard clearly by Xie Xiaoman at the top of the tree. She looked down and saw Yang Fan looking up at her, the bright moonlight shining on his face. "Hi. Alone? Are you not a human?" "Haha. Miss Xiaoman is really unruly. It seems that you are not in a good mood. Go away." Yang Fan laughed, but did not walk away. Instead, he bit the rabbit leg in his mouth, jumped up, and climbed up the tree trunk like an agile ape. Xie Xiaoman looked at Yang Fan climbing up like a monkey and said in surprise, "I didn't know you were so good at climbing trees. You are not much worse than my elder brother." Yang Fan said, "You have an elder brother?" Xie Xiaoman said, "Why can't I have an elder brother?" Yang Fan laughed. "That's true. I also have an elder brother. I also have a younger sister." He turned around and sat down on the trunk, swinging his legs. "Why are you sitting here alone?" Xie Xiaoman ignored him, grabbed the wine bag in her hand, raised her head, and took another big gulp of wine. Yang Fan could smell the alcohol and could not help but frown. "Why are you drinking so much alone? Are you in a bad mood?" Xie Xiaoman still did not speak. Yang Fan said, "You are the Empress bodyguard. Be careful not to let people smell the alcohol. They will find trouble with you." Xie Xiaoman glared at him and said fiercely, "You are annoying." Yang Fan sighed and handed over the roasted rabbit, saying, "Don't drink, eat the roasted rabbit. It is freshly roasted. It is still warm and fragrant." Xie Xiaoman looked at him, silent for a long time, then took the roasted rabbit, brought it to her mouth, and put it down. "Today I was ordered to arrest 2 people. "Oh." Xie Xiaoman's hair was tied up in a ponytail, a lock of hair hanging in front of her forehead, blown by the wind, passing by her eyes from time to time. Under her hair, her eyes were as bright as the stars, and Yang Fan could faintly see a trace of sadness in her eyes. Yang Fan could not help but lower his voice, whispering, "What is it?" Xie Xiaoman said quietly, "Those 2 people, they are the Crown Prince Zhang, Huai's only 2 remaining sons." Yang Fan was slightly moved. "The Empress's biological grandson?" Xie Xiaoman nodded lightly. Lai Junqin reported the 2 princes, saying that they cursed the Emperor's father. It was treason, and the Empress ordered an investigation. I thought that they would be arrested and interrogated. Unexpectedly, General Qiushinji surrounded the palace, and after capturing the 2 princes, he whipped them to death on the spot. Xie Xiaoman smiled. Under the cold moonlight, her smile was a little sad. "I am the Empress' personal guard. There are some missions in the inner guards that I do not have to do. I've killed people before, but not many, and I've never killed an unarmed and defenseless person." "Yes, the 2 princes, one is 11, the other is only 8. Yes, they were in front of me, being ruthlessly whipped by the wire of hardware. The whip was full of hooks, and with every lash a large piece of flesh and blood would be scraped off. At first they would still cry, but later on they could no longer make a sound. Only when the whip landed would their bodies twitch a little. When they breathed their last, it was a bloody mess, and they were unrecognizable. Xie Xiaoman's eyes were bright, and there was a faint glint of tears. She said in a low voice, "In the past, I heard people talk about some of the princes and ministers being punished. The heads of the ministers rolled on the ground. The family members who were not slaves were chained, like cattle and sheep herded in herds. The people who were banished far away were placed in prison carts. Their necks were torn by the large chains, and blood flowed everywhere the cart went. Prince Hua, Li Yuanghua, was 70 years old, and he died in a prison cart for 10 days. Prince Li Su of Jiangdu was beheaded in Jiangdu. Prince Li Yuanjia of Han and Prince Li Lingkue of Lu were ordered to commit suicide, and Prince Li Yuanjia's 3 sons were all beheaded. Prince Li Shan of Ji has always been a good ruler, but he was also exiled to Bazhou and died on the way, and all 5 of his sons were beheaded. And Prince Shu." Xie Xiaoman took a deep breath and said, "I have heard of these things before, but hearing is one thing, and seeing it with my own eyes is another. I still can't forget the way those 2 children looked at me. I know they begged me to save them, but there was nothing I could do." Yang Fan said coldly, "You did not kill them. Whether you went or not, they all had to die. The Empress wants to proclaim herself the Empress, so Li Tang's princes must all be killed. The senior statesmen and ministers loyal to Li Tang must all be killed. And those who can give hope and expectation to Li Tang's people must also be killed. In this regard, what did Li Tang's imperial family do? Hoping that she would be the fish that escaped the net. What did the civil and military officials who received the Li family's salary do? They begged for their own future and wealth. What did the feudal vassals do? They have a lot of troops in their hands. As long as it doesn't affect their interests, they don't care what the emperor's surname is. You're just a little girl. Why bother looking for trouble?" Xie Xiaoman looked at him in a daze. His series of killing made her hair stand on end. But thinking about it carefully, wasn't this the Empress's actions these past few years? Wasn't this the reaction of too many people? Yang Fan said softly, "You are just a bodyguard. With or without you, these things would have happened. You don't need to take these responsibilities on yourself. There are many injustices in this world that you can't shoulder." Xie Xiaoman looked at him in a daze and asked, "If it were you, would you be indifferent?" Yang Fan said coldly, "I only know that it's not my responsibility. If I had the ability to save him, and it wouldn't have implicated me, but I didn't help him, perhaps I would be condemned by my conscience. Otherwise, I would not be like you, sitting here and drinking. The one who wanted to kill was the Empress. The one who guessed the Emperor's intention was Lai Junqin, and the one who fawned over the execution was Qiu Shenji. What does it have to do with you?" Xie Xiaoman tilted her head and thought about it. What he said seemed to make sense, but also seemed to make no sense. She wanted to refute, but her head was dizzy after being drunk, and she couldn't think clearly. Yang Fan looked at her cute and naive appearance. That charm vaguely resembled his younger sister, and felt even more pity in his heart. He reached out to touch her hair, but suddenly remembered that this was not his younger sister. If he extended his hand, she would kick him off the tree. He hurriedly withdrew his hand and softly said, "Silly girl, don't think too much. Go back and drink a bowl of soup to soak up the hangover, then soak in a hot bath and have good rest. You are an imperial bodyguard. As long as you do your job well, don't let your imagination run wild." Xie Xiaoman nodded and said charmingly, "Yes." It sounded quite reasonable. At least, I felt much better now. You don't look too bad. Chapter 163. Yang Fan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I really don't know where your prejudice against me comes from. Have I ever done anything bad? Go back and rest. You look drunk. Do you want me to send you back?" Xie Xiaoman shook her head. "It's fine. This little bit of wine won't make me drunk." She raised her head and gulped down another mouthful of wine. She stuffed the wine bag and rabbit meat into Yang Fan's arms. "All right, I'm going back. I'll do as you said. Drink a bowl of soup to sober up, take a hot bath, have a good sleep, and forget about these things. Hey! Yang Fan reached out to grab her, but before he could do so, Xia Xiaoman had already jumped down. Yang Fan saw that she was already drunk and was afraid that she would lose her balance and fall. But he didn't expect that even though she was drunk, her jump was still smooth. Seeing her land firmly on the ground, Yang Fan was relieved. Xia Xiaoman waved at him and said, "I'm leaving." She turned around and took a step, then turned back and said, "And the rabbit meat you smoked, that smell, it's very close," looking at her receding figure. Yang Fan shook his head and smiled. He whispered to himself, "This girl is really drunk. She even said it smelled very close." Yang Fan looked up at the bright moon in the sky. He pulled out the cork of the wine bag and drank a mouthful of wine. He tore off a mouthful of meat and drank another mouthful of wine. Leaning against a tree, he recited, "When the melon is planted, it's yellow under the stage. When the melon is ripe, it's separated. One pluck makes the melon good. Another pluck makes the melon thin. 3 plucking is enough, but the last plucking is enough." This Huangtai Melon CI was written by Crown Prince Zhonghui Li Xian before he was exiled to Guazhou. On the surface, he was inspired by the sight of the melon fields. But in fact, it was a lyric poem because of his elder brother's sudden death and the uncertain future of himself and his 2 younger brothers. At that time, he let the music score prevail and sang this poem to Empress Wu, hoping to move his mother's heart. But it did not have the slightest effect. Instead, this poem was widely spread. Now, Li Xian had been forced to commit suicide. Although his 2 brothers, Li Dan and Li Xian, were still alive, they were in a precarious situation. Instead, his 2 sons had been forced to commit suicide. His branch of the family could be considered to have come to an end. This poem could be considered to have become a prophecy, only that it had happened to his own family. In terms of state affairs, this was a monarch killing a minister. In terms of family affairs, this was a grandmother killing her grandson. It seemed that no matter what, no one had the right to say anything. Then, under the illumination of the cold moonlight, Yang Fan actually felt a sense of desolation in his heart. The last of Crown Prince Zhang Huai's bloodline, 11-year-old Li Shi and 8-year-old Li Guangxuan, were whipped to death by their own grandmother because they cursed the monarch's father and committed treason. This matter did not affect Wu Zetian's traveling mood at all. The next day, the news that the empress would hold a large-scale traveling banquet on the banks of the Yi River spread. In the fragrant hill temple, in a meditation room temporarily used as the administrative office, Shanghai Wan carefully made arrangements. The famous musicians and dancers of the royal palaces, musical houses, and the left and right musical houses must be arranged in advance to avoid any mistakes during the rush. In addition, several famous music and dance troupes in Luoyang must also be invited. You can transfer a few pleasure boats here and let them live on them. They are not allowed to wander around. The steward of the musical house respectfully responded. Shanghai Wanner said, "What you said just now, make a more detailed plan. The empress likes grandeur, so the scene must be grand and lively. Start building the colored houses and colored houses now. You can borrow some soldiers from General Qiu Shinji to help." The steward of the musical house responded again. Shanghai Wan waved her hand and dismissed him. Then she said to Senior Captain Zhu Bin, "In the Dragon Gate section of the Yi River, there are checkpoints on both sides. Ships and people entering and leaving must have a pass jointly signed by the internal guards and the musical house before they can pass through. Ships must be strictly inspected, and there must be no negligence." "Yes," Zhu Bin answered and hurried to make arrangements. Shanghai Wan then said to the imperial officer of the Food Bureau, "Within the 4 seas, all kinds of delicacies on land and water must be prepared. Make a list of all kinds of ingredients and send them to the palace as soon as possible. If there is not enough, buy them as soon as possible. Tell Tuan to hurry up on this matter." In order to facilitate the supply, a temporary kitchen needs to be built on the bank of the Yi River. The location must be hidden and downwind so that the Empress won't smell it. I have decided on a place for you. You can go and have a look first. If there is nothing wrong, prepare it as soon as possible." After Shanghai Wan finished speaking, she asked a little eunuch to leave with the imperial officer of the Food Bureau. Then she inquired and made arrangements for the officials of the Imperial Clothing Bureau, the Imperial Carriage Bureau, the Imperial Carriage Bureau, the Imperial Household Bureau, the Imperial Household Bureau, and so on. When these people were all sent out, Shanghai Wan took a breath and sat down to carefully review the invitation list from the imperial household. Shanghai Wan read the invitation list from beginning to end, picked up a pen, added a few names, pondered for a moment, and crossed out a few names. Imperial banquets had never been a simple banquet. An invitation list, an order of seats, in the eyes of observant people was a clear signal. Other people didn't know. But as the Shanghai Wan who assisted Wu Zetian in handling court affairs, she knew many secrets that others didn't know. She knew that long before Lai Junqian impeached Crown Prince Zhang Huai's two sons, Wu Qingxi and Zhou Xing had jointly submitted a memorial to impeach Emperor Gaozong's sons, Li Shangjin, the Prince of Zhe, and Li Sujia, the Prince of Sun, for plotting rebellion. The Empress Dowager had issued a secret edict to arrest them all and bring them back to Luoyang to be punished. The reason why Lai Junqian impeached Crown Prince Zhang Huai's two sons was obviously because he heard the news and saw that he had fallen behind Zhou Xing. So he couldn't wait to step forward. But the Empress didn't even blink, didn't even investigate, and didn't care whether the crime of cursing the monarch's father was appropriate for the two children. She instructed Qiu Shenji to execute them. It was clear that a great purge of Li Tang's royal family was about to begin. The people that Shanghai Wan crossed out were all princes, and relatives of Li Tang's royal family in the capital, as well as ministers who were openly close to Li Tang's royal family. There were also a few princesses of the Tang dynasty, such as eldest Princess Dongyang. Eldest Princess Dongyang had once married Zhang Sun Wuji's uncle, Gao Xingxing. Empress Wu hated the house and its crow, so how could she possibly like her? Only a few people remained on the list, such as Princess Taiping and eldest Princess Qianjin. The few people she added were ministers who originally didn't have the qualifications to attend the banquet, but had recently been in frequent contact with the Wu family. Shanghai Wan knew that although the addition and deletion of a few people in a grand banquet didn't seem to be a big deal, in the eyes of some people, it would inevitably increase the arrogance of some people, adding fuel to the fire. But the reason why she was used by Empress Wu, wasn't it because Empress Wu needed such a person? It was easy for Empress Wu to find another female official who was good at understanding people's intentions. But if she left Empress Wu, she would just be a daughter abandoned by a big tree. She knew very well what fate awaited her at that time. So every day, she would be very careful, not allowing herself to make a single mistake, because she couldn't afford to make a mistake. Wan looked over the list again and handed it to a servant next to her. She ordered, "Send the message." After the servant left, Wan was the only one left in the crowded meditation room. She let out a sigh and stretched her body tiredly. She stared at the large Zen character on the wall across from her and began to daydream. Ever since she was kissed by Yang Fan, Shanghai Wan had been avoiding him because she didn't know what to do. However, once her emotions were stirred up, they would grow rapidly and crazily like weeds in spring. This little girl, who had always been reserved and introverted, barely managed to build a dam in her heart, but her emotions broke the dam again and again. She didn't dare to be idle. Once she was idle, she couldn't help but think of that person and that kiss. She finally knew what the feeling of lovesickness in the poem was. Picking leaves, not seeing each other for a day, is like 3 months. Picking leaves, not seeing each other for a day, is like 3 years. Picking leaves, not seeing each other for a day, is like 3 years. Come. Shanghai Wan clutched her wrist. She suddenly gathered her courage and called out loudly, "Waiting, what orders do you have?" The servant, Little Hai, appeared at the door. Shanghai Wan quickly waved her hand and said, "There's nothing else. You can leave." "Yes." Little Hai bowed and moved away from the door of the meditation room. Shanghai Wan was restless in the room. After struggling for a while, she called out again, "Come." Little Hai suddenly appeared at the door. She bowed and said, "Waiting, what orders do you have?" Shanghai Wan thought for a moment and waved her hand. "There's nothing else. You can leave." Little Hai was confused. She quietly moved away from the side of the door. Shanghai Wan stood up and paced in the room. After pacing for a while, she gritted her teeth and lightly stamped her foot. She called out, "Come." Little Hai faintly appeared at the door. She had a strange expression on her face. "Waiting, what orders do you have?" Shanghai Wan's face was taut. She solemnly said, "Go and call Imperial Bodyguard Yang Fan in. I have orders." Little Hai bowed and said, "Yes." Then he habitually moved to the side of the door. His figure flashed and disappeared. Then they heard him cry out as if he had just woken up from a dream. Then they saw him run back, running along the stone steps in front of the door. Shanghai Wan hurriedly rushed back to the table and sat down. She grabbed a brush and a memorial to the throne. When Yang Fan entered the meditation room, there was only Wan inside. She was bent over and sitting behind the table. Her hand was holding a weasel hairbrush. Her small face was completely red. She looked like a primary school student being forced by a strict teacher to write a poem. But the content of the poem had already been completely forgotten by her. When Yang Fan walked in, he couldn't help but feel a bit nervous. Most youngsters who had their first awakening of love were like this. Yang Fan had experienced many things, so his mentality could be considered quite calm. But he still couldn't completely avoid this. But when he saw Shanghai Wan's appearance, his nervousness was completely replaced by curiosity. He curiously looked at Shanghai Wan. He had never seen such an expression on her face before. He really didn't know what she meant. Shanghai Wan had just summoned the stewards of the inner, left, and right halls, as well as the officials of the 6 ministers and the 24 divisions. She had arranged all kinds of affairs in an orderly and confident manner. Even the fate and future of some members of the royal family had been easily completed by her without the slightest difficulty. But when Yang Fan came in, she was as nervous as a rabbit under the gaze of an eagle. She lowered her head and gripped her brush. She stared at a memorial to the throne on the table without saying a word. She didn't speak, but Yang Fan couldn't not speak. Yang Fan coughed and saluted, saying, "Shangguan is waiting for an imperial edict to summon your subordinate." "What's the matter?" Chapter 164. As soon as she heard Yang Fan's words, Shanghai Wan was startled like a rabbit that was shot by an arrow. She tightly gripped the pen, as if she was holding a sharp dagger. She nervously looked at Yang Fan. Suddenly, she gathered her courage and stammered, You like me, right?" Ah. Yang Fan really didn't expect her opening remarks to be like this. This sentence that came out of nowhere caused him to be unable to react, causing him to be in a daze. Shanghai Wan blushed and lowered her head. She slowly said, "Your request, I have carefully considered it for a long time." Yang Fan did not react. "Ah." Shanghai Wan stammered, "I called you here to tell you I allow you to like me." Shanghai Wan finished her words with a red face. She let out a big sigh of relief. She did not raise her head and just continued to bite the pen. Ah. Yang Fan was really dumbfounded this time. He stood there, dumbfounded, looking at Shanghai Wan. Shanghai Wan lowered her head and nervously bit the pen for a long time. She did not hear any movement, so she quietly raised her eyes. When her eyes met with Yang Fan's, she was startled and asked in surprise, "Why are you still here?" "You. Is there anything else?" Yang Fan blankly shook his head. Shanghai Wan let out a sigh of relief and said, "Oh." Then you go and do your work. I also have something to do." Yang Fan walked out as if he was sleepwalking. When he reached the door, he could not help but look back. Shanghai Wan was looking at him with a pair of big eyes. When Yang Fan turned around, Shanghai Wan was startled again. She was like a frightened little squirrel, quickly lowered her head and nervously continued to bite the pen. Yang Fan walked out of the meditation room in a daze. He stood under the sun as if he had not woken up from a dream. Although Yang Fan had never had a lover, he was not ignorant about the love affairs between men and women. But no matter how knowledgeable he was, he had never heard of establishing a relationship in this way. He could not even figure out what Shanghai Wan meant when she said, "I allow you to like me." Of course, he did not know that in the heart of Shanghai Wan, who had no experience in love, she had no other way to understand the love between men and women. This was already the most serious and solemn confession. "I accept your pursuit. I am willing to be your woman." There was almost no description of normal love words between men and women in poetry. Wan who was used to dealing with official documents, so it was not surprising that she used an official language to express her willingness to be Yang Fan's lover. It was just that poor Yang Fan, who claimed to be a prodigal son of love who has never touched a single leaf, when he was in Nanyang, was also confused by this expression that he had never seen before. Yang Fan stood under the porch with the halberd in his arms and guessed for a long time, combined with the shy expression of Shanghai, where at that time he vaguely guessed her intention. Yang Fan thought, "This Tang dynasty's Minister of Internal Affairs, who is in charge of the government and the literary world, who plays an important role in the political and literary circles, and the world's talented woman, could she be a bookworm? Does she think that they are lovers like this? If they are lovers like this, they can sleep on the same bed without interfering with each other's business, and they can also have children." The grand banquet was held at Longmen Mountain as scheduled. The banquet was held on the bank of the Yi River at the foot of Longmen Mountain. The famous musicians and dancers of the palaces Jiaofeng and the left and right Jiaofeng all came to the banquet. Several famous music and dance troupes in Luoyang were also called to participate in the grand event. Along the river, there were luxurious carriages and horses, shoulder to shoulder, and tens of thousands of people gathered. It was an unprecedented grand occasion. Colorful buildings were built on the river. Colorful boats and pleasure boats were built on the water. Pavilions and pavilions were shaded by green trees and flowers and grass along the river. Banquets were everywhere, and music and dance were everywhere. It was an unprecedented grand occasion. The palace banquets of the Tang dynasty had always been extremely luxurious. Within the 4 seas, treasures of land and water were all prepared, and the song and dance had always been particular about grandeur. Before the banquet officially began, hundreds of musicians of the musical house on the bank of the Yi River had already begun to imitate the 100 birds facing the wind. The sound echoed between the valleys on both sides of the river, like the singing of hundreds of birds. Yang Fan and Xia Xiaoman stood in a corner of the passage of the colorful house, watching the palace maids and courtesans carrying all kinds of delicious food to the colorful house built along the river. There were also beautiful dancers who had changed their clothes on the pleasure boats, barefooted and exposed their forearms, walking along the red carpet to the performance venue. Those dancers and courtesans were all young and beautiful girls. Now that they were dressed up for the performance, they looked even more stunning. Their snow-white skin, slender waists were half exposed, and their hips swayed as they walked. Yang Fan was not the only one who was mesmerized by them. Many guards on both sides were dazzled by them. It was all because there were too many beautiful girls, and they walked past in front of them too fast. At this time, there was no need to worry about not seeing the beautiful girls, but there were too few eyes to see them clearly. Xia Xiaoman looked at the eyes of the men and said disdainfully, "Why are you all like wolves?" Yang Fan looked at the beautiful girls with snow-white feet walking back and forth in front of him. He used his claws to scratch the halberd twice and said with a drooling expression, "I really want to be a beast." Xia Xiaoman rolled her eyes at him and said angrily, "What are you thinking? You are a beast." Yang Fan rolled his eyes at her and snorted, "You don't like me again. Have I ever been a beast to you?" Xia Xiaoman put her hand on the long sword at her waist. Little Yao raised her nose and snorted coldly, "You try." Since that night, Xia Xiaoman's attitude towards Yang Fan had become much friendlier. In fact, in the beginning, she disliked Yang Fan's bad habit of womanizing. Now, after so long, she gradually understood that it was not Yang Fan's womanizing, but the girls in the palace were too enthusiastic, too bold. Let's not talk about others, just her good sister. Don't think that she's always staying far away from Yang Fan, but look at her resentful eyes. If Yang Fan just hooked his little finger, she would happily send herself into the tiger's mouth. As for Yang Fan and Shangguan Daizhao's feelings, it had nothing to do with her. Although she still thought that Yang Fan and Shangguan Daizhao were not a good match, since they were in love, she could only wish them a happy ending. With the knot in their hearts gone, the two got along more naturally than before, although they still quarreled often. "Tian, Ho is here." There was a commotion in the distance. Someone softly shouted. Yang Fan and Xia Xiaoman quickly stood up and looked forward, only to see Wu Zetian in a splendid dress, surrounded by many dignitaries, slowly walking over. Xia Xiaoman quickly tidied up her clothes and quickly walked up to greet her. Wu Zetian slowly walked over on the red carpet. There were two beauties on her left and right. One wore clothes as white as snow and was as elegant as the clouds. The other wore a bright red dress and was like a ball of flames that could melt people. The woman dressed as white as snow, bright like the moon, was naturally Shanghai Wan, and the flame-like beauty was Princess Taiping. Yang Fan was slightly surprised because when Wu Zetian went to Dragon Gate this time, Princess Taiping did not go with her. He did not expect that Princess Taiping would also come today. Accompanying Wu Zetian was a large group of royal relatives, old and young, male and female. Princess Taiping not only brought her two daughters, but also brought her two daughters. The eldest daughter was 6 years old, the eldest son was 4 years old, the second daughter was 2.5 years old, and the youngest son was only a little more than 1 year old. They were all carried by the maids. Princess Taiping was holding Wu Zetian's arm, talking to her in a low voice. Wu Zetian nodded and smiled from time to time. Princess Taiping did not notice that Yang Fan was standing among the guards not far away, while Shanghai Wan was holding the other side of Wu Zetian. Her pair of beautiful eyes kept looking left and right. Suddenly seeing Yang Fan, Shanghai Wan-er's eyes lit up, her white cheeks slightly swayed with a touch of red. She quietly lowered her head, looked at her toes under the skirt, as if she was afraid of stepping on ants. "So, you are my woman." Yang Fan leaned on the halberd. With a face of hidden bitterness, he looked at Shanghai Wan-er, who was slightly tilting her head, shyly bowing her head. Step by step in front of him, in full view of the crowd, he could not even say a word. As for the flirting, could it be to look at the back of her head? Yang Fan suddenly felt that Xia Xiaoman's words were not unreasonable. It was really troublesome to find a wife who was too famous and had too much status. As soon as Empress Wu arrived, the banquet began. For this banquet, many dignitaries in the capital were invited, and whenever there was a chance, they would curry favor with Empress Wu. Princess Taiping was one of the few members of Li Tang's royal family. Needless to say, Princess Taiping was Wu Zetian's biological daughter. Everyone in the world knew that Empress Wu doted on this daughter the most. So when Princess Taiping was invited, she felt that the invitation was boundless. In terms of age, the princess was 5 or 6 years younger than Wu Zetian. However, in terms of seniority, she was the daughter of Li Yuan and the aunt of the Gaozong's Li Ji. Thus, the Gaozong's empress, Wu Zetian, had to treat her like an aunt. In addition, the two of them had a good relationship, so the princess was allowed to sit next to Empress Wu. The two of them were about the same age, so they were able to talk about many things together. With the addition of the princess, Wu Zetian was able to smile with just a few words. Wu Zetian patted Princess Taiping's arm and said, "The scenery at Dragon Gate is beautiful and pleasing to the eye. I am very happy here, but I lack a confidant. You don't have to leave today. Stay at my place tonight. We can have a good chat." The noble princess was overwhelmed by the favor and hurriedly said, "That's great. I haven't seen the Heavenly Empress these few days and haven't spoken to the Heavenly Empress, so my heart has been empty. Tonight, I will accompany the Heavenly Empress for a chat. Empress, please have a drink." Wu Zetian picked up a cup of fermented rice and took a sip. Her phoenix eyes turned and saw her daughter, Taiping, resting her chin on her palm, watching the singing and dancing on the red carpet in front of her lazily and disinterestedly. So she said, "Taiping, don't always be cooped up in the mansion. You have nothing to do. You can go sightseeing and relax. This time, you should stay for a few days." Chapter 165. When Princess Taiping heard Wu Zetian's words, she nodded slightly and said indifferently, "Since Anyang has ordered, your daughter will stay at Dragon Gate and accompany Anyang." Wu Zetian saw that her daughter's expression was gloomy. She knew that today the invited guests of the imperial family were all in one hall, and most of them were in pairs. Her daughter was reminded of her late husband, and therefore she resented her. Wu Zetian sighed inwardly and said to Shangguan since we are traveling, there is nothing important, other than when we are dealing with memorials to the throne. You don't need to be in front of the emperor all the time. You and Taiping have always been good friends. The two of you get along well." Shanghai Wan was in a trance. She was thinking about that handsome young man, when she suddenly heard Wu Zetian talking to her. She couldn't help but be startled. When she heard Wu Zetian's order, she was overjoyed and quickly replied, "One obeys." Shangguan Wan was secretly delighted. Ever since she had plucked up the courage to confess her feelings to Yang Fan, her heart had finally found a place to belong to. However, due to her special status, she could not be free easily. How could she have the chance to spend even a moment with her lover? Now she finally had the chance. Shanghai Wan couldn't wait to tell this good news to Yang Fan, but she couldn't leave right now. Even if she left, how could she talk to Yang Fan in public? Unable to restrain himself, he took the opportunity to write a line of words on his handkerchief with an eyebrow pencil and returned to the side of the stage. Seeing Xia Xiaoman pacing back and forth by the side of the stage, he coughed and said, "Xiaoman." Xia Xiaoman quickly stepped forward and cupped her fists. "Your humble servant is here." Shanghai Wan calmly took out the folded thing from her sleeve and handed it to her. She ordered, "Quickly hand this thing to Yang Fan's bodyguard. Don't make any mistakes." Xia Xiaoman was startled. She took it with both hands. It was light and soft. When she looked carefully, she saw that it was a handkerchief. Xia Xiaoman nodded and left with the silk in her sleeve. Shangguan Wanner added, "This is urgent. Have Guard Yang go to a secret place to watch by himself." Here, Xia Xiaoman turned around. Little Yao wrinkled her nose and thought to herself, "What urgent matter do you have that you need to instruct a big shot from the escort division to do it? Bang! It's obviously the two of you who are being lovey-dovey with each other, but you're using me as a messenger goose. Really, who am I working for?" The princess was invited today, and she already felt honored. Now that Empress Wu had specially asked her to stay for the night, she was even more excited. She sat beside Wu Zetian and chatted with her carefully. She only cared about pleasing Empress Wu. Empress Wu glanced at her daughter from time to time because she saw that her daughter was lonely. The noble princess saw this and hurriedly said, "Today, the Empress has set up a banquet. The monarch and the officials are gathered together, and the atmosphere is joyous and harmonious. I know that Princess Taiping's dancing skills are outstanding. Why don't we invite Taiping to sing and dance to help the Empress enjoy the wine?" Wu Zetian looked at Taiping and smiled. "Daughter, your mother hasn't seen you sing and dance for a long time. Today is a rare occasion. Why don't you dance for your mother?" Princess Taiping saw that all the invited members of the imperial family were sitting together with their husband and wife, while she was alone. She couldn't help but feel a little lonely. She vaguely remembered that when her father was still alive, Li Tang's family would gather together at every banquet. But now, there were only a few Li family members left. She felt even more sad and said, "Your daughter is a little tired and has drunk a few cups. It's not suitable for me to dance." Empress Wu's face darkened slightly. Shang Guanwaner was sitting beside her happily. When she saw that Empress Wu was unhappy, she hurriedly said, "It's better for two people to dance than for one person to dance alone. Waner is willing to dance twin tuji with Princess. I wish the Empress eternal youth and longevity as long as the heavens." Shangguan Waner got up and walked over to Princess Taiping. She gently pulled her sleeve and gave her a look. Taiping understood. She knew that her mother had always been strong, and it wouldn't be good to embarrass her. She also got up and said, "Then your daughter will dance with Shangguan Daizhao. If I don't dance well, mother must not laugh at me." Empress Wu's countenance cleared up. She laughed and said, "You little girl, what are you afraid of if your mother laughs at you? Besides, how can these dancers compare to my daughter's dancing? Quickly dance." Today's banquet was grand. Shangguan Waner, who always wore men's clothing, and Princess Taiping, who liked to wear men's clothing, were both wearing colorful palace dresses. One was pure white and elegant, the other was as red as a raging fire. They didn't need to change into special dancing clothes. The little eunuch went to make arrangements. The dancers and singers quickly withdrew. The musicians also stopped playing, waiting for the two to come on stage to perform the Tuzhe Ji dance. Princess Taiping and Shangguan Waner both came down from the stage. They stood opposite each other on the red carpet. One was wearing a blazing red dress, the other was wearing a snow-white dress. They had their own characteristics, but they were all charming. They immediately attracted everyone's attention. Dong! 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 The musicians sat on the bow of the boat. The gaily painted boat was anchored on the opposite side of the riverside. The drums sounded 3 times. Princess Taiping and Shangguan Waner raised their sleeves. Pa! They raised their sleeves and swung their waists, just like a phoenix spreading its wings. Dong, 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 the rhythmic sound of drums sounded, followed by the accompaniment of various musical instruments with the style of the western regions. It made people who listened to the cheerful music have a magical power to dance with it. On the stage, Princess Taiping straightened her shoulders and held her chin. She twisted her waist and bent her hips. Her right arm stretched out like a snake and her left leg slightly covered behind her buttocks. Her enchanting posture and enchanting curves made people's hearts beat faster. Shangguan Waner did the same movement as her. The difference was that she raised her left arm and sucked her right leg behind her buttocks. The two of them did the same movement. It was as if they were dancing alone in front of a mirror. The red one was like fire, the white one was like snow. The colors were bright. The Tuzhe Ji first move of the drum. The flowery gown was slender. Both had slender waists and both were enchanting. They squatted, knelt, folded their wrists and spun around. Their movements were vigorous and graceful. One advanced, one retreated, and the other moved back and forth. Their white dresses danced like flying snow, while their red dresses were like raging flames. In addition, both of them had the same rosy complexion, and it was mesmerizing to watch. Good, good, hee, your daughter danced really well. Since she became a wife, I haven't seen her dance for a long time. It's hard for this child to not be left behind. Wu Zetian nodded her head repeatedly. Her face was full of smiles. The noble princess stole a glance at her face. She said softly, "Taiping is young, beautiful, and talented. The Empress should be proud to have such a good daughter. It's just that Noble Princess and Taiping have a good relationship. We often see each other. I always feel that Taiping is often depressed. Wu Zetian's face turned slightly cold. She was the one who ordered the death of Taiping's son-in-law, Xue Xiao. She also knew that this matter hurt her daughter greatly. For this reason, she broke the rule that the princess of the Tang dynasty could not have more than 350 households. She raised Princess Taiping's fief to 1,200 households. Princess Taiping's fief was raised to 1,000 households in the Tang dynasty. At the same time, she was rewarded with a large amount of wealth. She also knew that these worldly possessions could not make up for the harm her daughter had suffered. She still remembered when Xue Xiao had just been arrested and thrown into prison. Her daughter had knelt in front of her and begged for mercy. However, she could only do this. This world is fair to everyone. If you want to gain something, you must lose something. Even someone as powerful as her could not have it both ways between the throne and familial love. The noble princess hurriedly said, "Empress, noble princess means that Taiping is so young and beautiful. How can she waste her life like this? Noble princess was widowed when she was young and knows the feeling of a lonely quilt on a cold night. Empress, you love Taiping the most. Can you bear to let her suffer so miserably? Noble princess thinks that Empress should quickly choose a good son-in-law for Taiping. At that time, the husband and wife will be in harmony and love will be complete. Empress, you will also be able to put down your worries, right?" Wu Zetian hesitantly said, "We have naturally thought about this. It's just that Xue Xiao died less than a year ago. To choose another son-in-law for her now seems a bit." The noble princess said, "Empress, you are worrying too much. It is precisely because Taiping often thinks of her deceased husband that we should choose a son-in-law for her as soon as possible." Wu Zetian was somewhat moved. She muttered to herself, I just don't know which family's son is suitable." The noble princess hurriedly said, "Speaking of this, there is really no one more familiar with this than me. If Empress has this intention, then I will immediately start making arrangements." Wu Zetian also knew that the noble princess had a good relationship with many people. She was an active person in Luo Jing's circle of nobles. After thinking for a while, she finally nodded and said, "Fine. Then help me look around and see which family's son is worthy of my daughter." The noble princess was overjoyed. She hurriedly replied, "Yes, your majesty." Wu Qingxi sat behind a table on the left and cast a glance at the noble princess. The noble princess nodded slightly, revealing a trace of a smile. Wu Qingxi was very happy. He raised his cup and drank it in one gulp. At this time, thunderous applause and cheers could be heard everywhere. Wu Zetian and the noble princess looked forward and saw that Princess Taiping and Shang Guanwan were performing the last move of the twin Ji. It was a very large, waist-bending movement. The white part was like the moon, and the red part was like the rainbow. It won the applause of the entire hall. The moon quietly crept up the treetops. The chirping of insects lingered in the ears. The spring breeze gently caressed their faces. It made the forest seem even more quiet. Yang Fan leaned against a tree and broke off a stalk of grass out of boredom. He played with it in his hand for a while and then put it in his mouth. Xie Xiaoman gave him a handkerchief. The handkerchief had a light and delicate fragrance on it, and there was a line of beautiful handwriting on it. "When the moon rises above the willow branches, I look forward to meeting Lang Jun Wan Er." Yang Fan came, holding the handkerchief with his daughter's fragrance. The moon had already climbed up the treetops, but there was still no trace of her. Yang Fan was already a little anxious. Wan Er left Princess Taiping's dormitory. She walked along the winding corridor of the temple to the side hall and walked to a door in the side hall. When Wu Zetian told her to spend more time with Princess Taiping, she knew that her chance had come. As long as she didn't stay by Empress Wu's side, Even if she left for a while, she would have an excuse to cover up. No one would care about her whereabouts. Several guards who were on duty tonight were standing in front of the door of the side hall, chatting with each other. As soon as they saw Shang Guanwan, they quickly straightened up and said respectfully, "Shang Guanwan awaits the edict." "Yes," Shanghai Wan lightly responded. She was about to step out when a cook asked, "Waiting for the imperial edict. Where are you going?" Shanghai Wan said, "I'm just taking a walk to relax." The cook hurriedly said, "It's getting late. Waiting for the imperial edict to go out. Do you need me to bring a few guards?" Shang Guanwan said indifferently, "What can happen in this place? I like the quiet." The cook embarrassedly agreed and didn't dare to speak anymore. Shanghai Wan slowly walked out of the mountain gate and walked into the forest path. As soon as she was out of the sight of the guards, she immediately quickened her pace. It's not easy to get rid of Lingyu. The time has passed. I'm afraid I can't wait for Langjun. Chapter 166. Shanghai Wan hurriedly ran to the place where Yang Fan had pounced on her last time. She stretched out her hand and pulled the ribbon on her arm. Because she ran too quickly, the ribbon got caught on a branch. Gasping for breath, it was quiet all around. Yang Fan's figure was nowhere to be seen. Shanghai Wan couldn't help but be startled. Could it be that Xiao Man didn't send the message? That can't be. Xiao Man has already reported to me that he was the one who personally received the silk handkerchief. Also, I've already checked. He's not on duty today. Could it be that he was also delayed by something? Because Shanghai Wan came out from Princess Taiping's place. It was not suitable for her to change her attire, so this was her regular attire from Princess Taiping's place. She wore a lotus root silk blouse and a light yellow skirt. This was a revealing outfit, with a crimson V-neck, a pair of full breasts that didn't match her slender figure, squeezing out an alluring cleavage. Following her rapid breathing, her soft breasts rose and fell. Her snow-white skin was reflected by the moonlight, like a light snow on a sunny day. Slowly bundled silk skirt covered half of her chest, like a white jade with cicada wings and silk clothes. Looking at a beauty under the moonlight, it was really soft and charming. At this time, a shadow flashed behind the tree. Yang Fan flashed out with a smile. Shanghai Wan first covered her mouth in shock. When she saw it was him, she threw herself at him. Just as she was about to enter his embrace, she suddenly stopped, shyly looked at him, lowered her head and said, "Bad guy! You came early but hid here to scare me." This sentence was even more touching. No different from exposing a young girl's feelings. Yang Fan's heart was moved. He was overjoyed. He knew that his family's wonder was not a bookworm, but actually quite interesting. He couldn't help but chuckle, gently grabbed her pair of soft hands, and mischievously said, "Who told you to come late? You made me wait for so long. Scaring you is already light. You didn't come late. You should be spanked. You should be spanked until you're little but is swollen." Shanghai Wan aggrievedly said, "How can there be such a rule?" Yang Fan put on a straight face and said, "Why not? This is the rule in Nanyang, so this is the rule of our Yang family." Shangguan Wan thought about how her buttocks were going to be hit by his big hand, and how he would hit it until it was red and swollen. She was ashamed and embarrassed, but also wronged. Thereupon she raised her little face, and with a blushing face begged, "Can I hit you?" He had no choice but to escape with great difficulty. "In all my years, I have never been beaten before. My mother has never beaten me before, and the Empress has never beaten me before." In the beginning, Yang Fan thought that she was just joking with him. Listening to her interesting words, he was delighted. However, the more he listened, the more he felt that something was wrong. Looking at her serious and aggrieved expression, he couldn't help but be surprised. Yang Fan asked tentatively, "You can't be thinking that I'm really going to spank you, right?" Shangguan Wan was stunned and asked in surprise, "Didn't you just say that?" After a brief pondering, Yang Fan sorted out his chaotic thoughts and explained, "I wasn't really fighting." I was fighting for real, no. I mean, I wasn't using all my strength. Shangguan Wanner's big innocent eyes widened, and she asked in surprise, Then why are you fighting? Although Yang Fan was still a young boy, when he was in Nanyang, young boys and precocious girls of the same age often talked about these topics. When he came to Luoyangxiu in workshop, he spent all day with the workshop attendants and was even more imperceptibly influenced. He tried hard to recall the teachings of the girls and the hot words of the Nanyang sisters, and tried to use the simplest words to explain. Actually, this spanking is just a light pat, and it's very enjoyable. Not only is it not painful, but it's also very comfortable. Oh, then isn't it a waste of time? Yang Fan said patiently, It's not a waste of time. Its purpose is not to hit people. It's actually a kind of bedroom pleasure, a method of flirting between men and women. Oh, I see. Shangguan Wanner slightly tilted her head, her delicate eyebrows slightly furrowed. She seemed to understand, but she was very serious and trying very hard to understand it. The exquisite royal sister in Yang Fan's eyes suddenly disappeared. This was clearly an extremely cute little girl. The body of a royal sister, the heart of a little girl. Yang Fan weakly held his forehead. The quiet river was silent, but under the moonlight, the flowing water constantly flashed with layers of light. Yang Fan and Shangguan Wanner sat on a rock about 3 feet above the river, the trees and weeds around them hiding their figures. Yang Fan's hand was wrapped around Wanner's slender waist, and Wanner automatically snuggled into his arms, her face full of sweetness. Of course, right now, Yang Fan could not make any further moves. He only put his hand on her waist, which made Wanner's delicate body tense up. It took a long time for her to calm down. No matter if Yang Fan's hand was moving up to touch those 2 soft lumps of flesh, or if he wanted to quietly slide down to get closer to her round and perky buttocks, Wanner would quietly grab his hand and put it back on her waist. Right now, she was already intoxicated with a man snuggling up to her like this, listening to his soft words of love and feeling the heat of his large hands on her waist. She couldn't take any more intimacy. Am I stupid? After several times of not understanding or misunderstanding Yang Fan's words of love and seeing Yang Fan's embarrassment, the clever Wanner finally sensed that something was wrong. She could not help but ask carefully, Of course not. Yang Fan gently kissed her smooth and tender cheeks. He softly said in her ear, Can a stupid woman become a female scholar who weighs the talents of the world? In fact, my Wanner is too naive. You grew up in the palace, and you have never been in contact with these people and these things. Shanghai Wanner was relieved. She put her face on his chest and rubbed it sweetly. She softly said, I don't know how to be your woman, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, I have you. You can teach me. Mr. Yang wanted to say, Come, help me pull some grass and lay it here. Strip yourself and lie on it. However, he could only think about it. As a new teacher, he also understood the principle of step by step. He had to guide her step by step. He could not scare his good student. However, it was not always Yang Fan who played the role of Mr. Yang. When they naturally talked about their future, Shanghai Wanner showed that she had always been smart and capable. Lang Jun, we can't make our relationship public yet. The Empress is about to ascend the throne. In the past, many things could only be handled by me, who was waiting for an imperial edict in the palace. Once I become the Empress, I can legitimately rule over all the officials in the world. I can meet the internal and external ministers. The prime ministers can help the Empress with a lot of things. Maybe I can have more freedom. Shanghai Wanner apologetically said to Yang Fan, Also, your current official position. Lang Jun, please don't misunderstand. I don't care about it, but the Empress does. The Empress values family background and status the most. If I say I want to marry you, even if others don't say anything, the Empress will not agree. Yang Fan nodded his head heavily and said, I understand. This is also what worries me. Shanghai Wanner said, Wanner has planned for Lang Jun. Lang Jun, Please don't blame Wanner for making a decision on my own. Yang Fan said, Of course not. What is Wanner's plan? Shanghai Wanner said, Wanner has thought of 2 ways. One is to let Lang Jun change his official position 3 times a day. In less than a year, you will be a top official. At that time, with Lang Jun status, it won't be difficult for you to marry Wanner. The other way is slightly more difficult, but it is also an opportunity. As for how to do it, I still need to think carefully. This little girl who snuggled in Yang Fan's arms like a little bird was indeed worthy of being the hidden minister of the Tang dynasty. Yang Fan usually saw her handling memorials for Wu Zetian, and from time to time she would go to Hongwen Library to recite poems with the scholars. Otherwise, she would change into martial arts clothes and be active on the court. But now, it was so easy for her to turn a small soldier into an official of the court. The little girl had become a big sister, and an omnipotent big sister at that. Yang Fan said, What is Wanner's plan? Shanghai Wanner said, The first method is for Lang Jun to retire from the army. Wanner will find someone to recommend Lang Jun to become an official. Yang Fan frowned and said, Is it so easy to become an official? Shanghai Wanner said, sweetly, Of course it is difficult, but easy is not difficult. Our imperial examinations are held once a year, and each examination only takes 12 people. How can we satisfy the needs of the officials of such a big country? Self-recommendation, recommendation, imperial examination, inheritance, grace, there are many ways to become an official. Wanner assists the Empress in handling government affairs, and many officials in the court owe Wanner a favor. This is a small favor, and people will naturally help. At that time, it doesn't matter if it is through recommendation, or if Lang Jun chooses a famous family and becomes a relative. It will be easy to get Lang Jun an 8th or 9th rank official. Of course, there was a recommendation system at that time, but the people who were recommended were either famous, talented, or originally low-ranking officials with political achievements. In short, they had to have a certain level of qualifications. But of course, this was not a problem for Shang Guanwan. As for the family shadow system, it was a special benefit for officials of 5th rank and above. They had the right to recommend their own children to become officials. Di Renjie's 3rd son, Di Guangzhao, used this method to become an official. But this system was no longer limited to children. Because everyone was doing this, no one came out to find fault. Whoever dared to break this unspoken rule that was beneficial to all officials would become the public enemy of the court. Even someone as incorruptible as Di Renjie used to recommend his aunt's nephew, who was not his biological brother, to become an official through the family shadow system. So, Shanghai Wanner didn't even need to deliberately find a rich family with the same surname for Yang Fan. She just needed to attach herself to a distant relative and get him a low-ranking official. With Shanghai Wanner's power as the prime minister, it was very easy for her to get an 8th or 9th rank official. But of course, an 8th or 9th rank official was still not qualified to marry a woman of Shanghai Wanner's status. But from an 8th or 9th rank official, almost every step was as difficult as ascending to the sky. Shanghai Wanner let him be a low-ranking official first. Her intention was obviously to let him enter the court system first. Although Yang Fan was not very familiar with the court, he was clear about this. He couldn't help but ask, But then, how do you change your official position 3 times in a day and become an official within a year? Chapter 167. Persuasion. Shanghai Wanner stared at Yang Fan and said, The Empress is about to ascend to the throne, but this window paper has not been pierced yet. There will definitely be someone who will pierce it. This person has to represent the will of the people, so the official position cannot be too high, and it cannot be a nephew of the Wu family. Ordinary people are too much of a joke, so it must be a low-ranking official. Shanghai Wanner said, You used to be a worker at the Showen workshop, a monk at the White Horse Temple, and a soldier of the Imperial Army. Your Kuju and Jiju are famous in Luojing, and you have a large number of fans. Not only can you represent the people, but you can also easily gather people from all walks of life to lead the persuasion. This is completely different from the first merit. As long as you can make this contribution, you will soon become an official of the people. Yang Fan said, "Meritorious service is also a talent. Just leading the persuasion will make me an official of the people?" Shanghai Wanner smiled and said softly, "Lang Jun, have you not heard of the story of buying a horse's bones with 1,000 pieces of gold?" Yang Fan suddenly understood. He thought for a while and slowly asked, "Then what is the second method?" Shanghai Wanner's eyes flashed with a strange light. She asked, "Lang Jun, you are not willing to persuade the people? Do you also think that a woman seizes the dawn only the family rope?" Yang Fan shook his head and said, "In this world, is it important whether the Li or the Wu family is the emperor? Is it important whether the emperor is a man or a woman? I don't think so. As long as he is a good emperor who can bring happiness to the world, what does it matter? When I was in Nanyang, I saw some small countries where women were the kings. The people lived and worked in peace, and the sky did not fall. However, using persuasion as a way to advance is a shortcut, but also a dangerous one. When I was in Nanyang, I had a very insightful elder who taught me a lot about how to behave and how to do things. He also told me about the world's events from ancient times until now. Since ancient times, those who used this shortcut to advance to the top did not have a good ending. A person with no foundation suddenly stepped on the heads of countless people and became their natural enemy. Especially now, cruel officials were running amok in the imperial court, and the various powers were tangled and complicated. It was even more dangerous to be in such a high position. Besides, if I use this method to get promoted, I will be looked down upon by others. If I become an official who is looked down upon, I will not be happy, and Wanner will not be happy either." Shangguan Wanner happily said, "Wanner is also worried about this, but I haven't had time to tell Lang Jun about the pros and cons of this matter. I didn't expect Lang Jun to be able to see through the mystery and see through it so clearly." "Don't flatter me," Yang Fan said with a laugh. "I don't know much about the officialdom. How can I have this kind of ability? You only need to say it, and I can see the pros and cons clearly. In fact, it's because you said just now that you've thought of 2 methods, and that the other one is more difficult and requires careful consideration. If there were no downsides to this method of persuading Wanner to be promoted, with Wanner's intelligence, why would she spend so much effort to think of a second method? It was because I remembered what you said, that I was certain that this method must be accompanied by great benefits and great harm. So I racked my brain to think of what's so bad about it." Shangguan Wanner pursed her lips and smiled. "Lang Jun, you don't have to be so modest. Although it's like that, how many people would think about the disadvantages of this method of promotion? Lang Jun is so young, but your mind is so meticulous. You really can't be compared to an ordinary man." Yang Fan grabbed her slender waist and said with a smile, "If it was an ordinary man, how could he enter Shangguan Daizhao's eyes?" Shangguan Wanner looked up and pouted coquettishly. "You still call me Shangguan Daizhao." Yang Fan said, "I won't call you that. I'll only call you Wanner, my good Wanner." He lowered his head and caught her cherry lips, teasing her with his tongue. Shangguan Wanner's delicate body softened, and she panted and collapsed into his arms. Her charming eyes were like silk, and then she asked, "Wanner, what's the second method?" Shangguan Wanner's body went limp. She felt that as soon as he kissed her, there was an indescribable sweetness in her body. She was 25 years old, and this was the first time she had experienced such a feeling of floating in the air. After Yang Fan finished his question, Wanner was still lying on his lap like she was drunk. After a while, she gently hit him and pouted coquettishly, "Bad man, you've made me so confused. How can I talk?" Who said that this little girl didn't understand the matters between a man and a woman. After all, she was a mature girl. The only thing she lacked was this kind of knowledge. Now that she was teased a little, she naturally glowed with all kinds of amorous feelings. If her naivety in love was a little more mature, It was unknown how charming she would be. Shangguan sat up and tidied her hair. Then she said, "The other method is more difficult. Now, I only have a general idea. As for how to do it, I need to think about it carefully." Yang Fan said, "Tell me about it." Wanner sorted out her thoughts and said slowly, "The second method, I think, is to continue to develop in the army. But I need to transfer the 16 guards of the Southern Office to the Northern Office." Although Yang Fan was now a member of the Royal Army, he didn't know the complicated relationship of the Royal Army. He couldn't help but wonder, the Northern Office? Wanna nodded and said yes. The 16 guards of the Southern Office need to be approved by the Ministry of War even if the Empress mobilizes them. And the Northern Office, to be exact, is the Emperor's private army. This private army has existed since the founding of the Tang Dynasty. It was originally the 30,000 elite troops who followed Emperor Gaozu in Taiyuan. After the founding of the Tang Dynasty, this army is independent of all other armies. Even the Ministry of War can't command it. It only listens to the Emperor and acts according to the Tiger Seal. It is called the Yuan Tsung Imperial Army. When Emperor Taizong was in power, he selected 100 elite guards from the Yuan Tsung Imperial Army to guard the Xuanwu Gate. They wore tiger skin clothes and rode on horses, so they are called 100 Horsemen. Shangguan said sweetly, "You are a big horseman, and you will be on duty every 3 months. Eventually, you will be transferred out of the palace. Once you are transferred to the Northern Office Imperial Army, you will be the Empress's private army and can stay in the palace. And once you become one of the 100 Horsemen, you will be the Empress's private guard. You can walk freely in the palace, and there will be fewer restrictions." Yang Fan just knew that there were so many tricks in it. Seeing Shanghai Wanner talking proudly, he couldn't help scratching her nose gently and said with a smile, "In this way, I can see Wanner often, right?" Shanghai Wanner smiled mischievously and said in a sweet voice, "No." They said that once you become 100 Horsemen, it will be much easier for you to be promoted than the generals of the Southern Office. The Northern Office Imperial Army is actually the Emperor's private army, but nominally it is attached to the Yulin Guard. The general of the Yulin Guard is Wu Yui, the nephew of the Empress. The general of the left Yulin Guard is Yan Jingrong, and the general of the right Yulin Guard is Li Duozhua. In fact, Li Duozhua and Yan Jingrong can only mobilize the ordinary Yulin Guard. Only Wu Yui has the right to mobilize the Yuan Tsung Imperial Army, which is the strongest and most powerful. Have you heard of the Plum Blossom Internal Guard? The Plum Blossom Internal Guard is also a part of the Yuan Tsung Imperial Army. Do you understand how much power they have now? Yang Fan nodded solemnly. Shanghai Wanner frowned slightly and said, "It's just that after becoming a Yuan Tsung Imperial Army, it's not easy to be promoted step by step and become the trusted commander of the Emperor's trusted army. I haven't thought about how to make Lang Jun stand out in the Yuan Tsung Imperial Army." Yang Fan gently put his arm around her shoulder and comforted her. "This kind of thing can't be arranged by you. I'm a man. If I rely on you for everything, how can it be? You've shown me the way. If I walk on this road and climb this mountain, I still have to rely on my own efforts. I don't believe that I'm worse than others." Yang Fan gently sighed and let her head lean on his chest. He looked at the clear moon in the sky and the faintly discernible stars. For a moment, he was filled with lofty sentiments. From now on, he had another goal in life. He wanted to kill his enemy, find his little sister, marry his woman, and work hard to become an official, a high-ranking official. Shanghai Wanner looked at his handsome and energetic face with fascination. His eyes were confident and firm. She was gratified and said, "Yes, I believe in Lang Jun's ability. Lang Jun doesn't need to worry too much. As long as we have the heart to seize every opportunity, it shouldn't take too long." She gently leaned on Yang Fan's chest and murmured, "In order to make the Empress the Emperor, there will inevitably be a reign of terror in the court. There will be many vacancies, and many opportunities will appear." It was a light sentence, but it was like a clap of thunder in a silent place. The sea of officialdom had been quietly stirred up. But Juana didn't want to think about this. This was not something she could control. These years, she had seen too many ups and downs of life and death. The only thing she wanted was to protect herself and the people she cared about in this turbulent time. Since the day she became a palace slave, there were very few people she cared about in this world. Now, there was one more person she cared about in this world, her man. Juana gently sighed and buried her head deep in Yang Fan's chest, listening to his powerful heartbeat. She suddenly felt a peace in her heart that she had never felt before. Perhaps this was happiness. A wisp of cloud passed by in the sky. The moonlight cast mottled shadows in the forest. Juana only hoped that time would stop at this moment, but she knew in her heart that it was time for her to go back. I'm going back." Yang Fan accompanied Juana until they were a stone's throw away from Taiping's residence. If they went any further, there might be soldiers patrolling and they would inevitably be seen. Shanghai Juana stopped and reluctantly said to Yang Fan. On the way back, her little hand was held by Yang Fan. It was as if she had become a delicate little woman. She liked the feeling of her hand being held by his broad and strong hand. Yang Fan nodded and said in a low voice, "I don't know when it will be convenient to see you again." Shanghai Juana was satisfied with her lover's attachment to her. Her eyes were full of hope, and she smiled sweetly. "I will think of a way. Let's go. If we delay any longer, I'm afraid Taiping will be suspicious." Yang Fan nodded. Shanghai Juana gently pulled her hand out of his hand and took 2 steps back. She looked at him affectionately and turned to step onto the small path that led to the mountain gate. Shanghai Juana, wearing a light-colored apricot yellow dress, was bathed in the hazy starlight and moonlight. She was like a fairy walking on the waves. Chapter 168. On the same night, on the shore of Chiu Lake, a Wu boat swayed gently on the surface of the lake in the spring breeze. Suddenly, a hurried bell rang. An ray of light from the cabin shone on the deck. There was a thin rope tied to the side of the ship, and there was a bell hanging on the thin rope. At this moment, the thin rope was stretched taut, and the other end was far away in the water. The bell kept ringing along with a rapid trembling of the thin rope. "Ha ha ha! It's hooked!" With a burst of old and loud laughter, a short and fat old man wearing a round neck robe and barefooted hurriedly ran to the deck with a book in his hand. When he saw the urgent ringing of the bell, he hurriedly threw the book to the side and hurriedly pulled the rope from the water. 2 more people came out from behind him. One was a strong, dark, skinny man who ran forward to help him pull the rope. The other was a pretty girl dressed in green. She rolled up the bamboo curtain unhurriedly and tied the rope to the frame of the cabin door. The cabin lights illuminated the bow of the ship. With the help of the man, the old man pulled the rope to the bow of the ship, and a lively big grass carp was pulled onto the ship by him. This big grass carp weighed about 30 to 40 pounds, and it jumped with all its might, almost pulling the fat old man down. The fat old man saw that the big fish was already on the ship, and there was no need to worry about it escaping again. He laughed and said complacently, "How is it? How is it? What did I say? I said we can catch fish without fishing gear, right? Ha!" The old man put his hands on his waist, which was so fat that it was almost impossible to see his curves, and laughed complacently. The big grass carp slapped under his feet, and the strength was so great that it made the cabin slightly shake. The light shone on the fat old man's face. His hair and beard were already 80% white, and he had a round, slightly dark face. His face was plump, and his eyes were full of spirit, giving people a gentle and generous feeling. He didn't know how to trim his beard, and it matched his fluffy and slightly crooked hair bun. He was completely slovenly. "Ha! Ah Lang really has a way to catch fish like this." The lean man grabbed a clothes hammering rod and hit the fish's head hard a few times. The fat grass carp finally stopped jumping around. He then bent down and deftly untied the rope. He took off the fish hook and the bell, rinsed them with water, and handed them to the fat old man. He then excitedly picked up the big fish. The fat old man picked up the bell, shook the water inside, and handed it to the girl in green, saying, "Chanwan, the bell is back to you." The pretty girl in green took the bell from the fat old man's hand, squatted down, rolled up her trouser leg, and hung it back on the bell. The old man also pulled a thin rope from the side of his collar. There was a small loop at the end of the rope. The fish hook in the old man's hand had a hook, and as soon as it was hooked onto the iron loop, it was stuck. Nobody knew what it was for. The old man rubbed his hands and smiled as he urged the thin man, Shang, quickly clean up the fish and stew it for this old man to drink. Chanwan, quickly go and make the fire bigger. This old man is almost drooling." The pretty girl in green pursed her lips, smiled, and went back into the cabin. The strong man called Shang pulled out a sharp knife from his waist and began to slaughter the fat fish at the bow. The fat old man squatted at the side like a child, as if Shang could immediately clean up the fish if he didn't blink. Shang slaughtered the fat fish and muttered, "The Empress is summoning Lang back to the capital. This is such a big matter. Why is Lang not in a hurry? We've been walking and stopping along the way, and only now have we arrived at Haiying County. There's still a long way to go before we reach Luojing." The fat old man glared at him and said, "The Empress is summoning me back to the capital, and I'm not even in a hurry. Why are you in such a hurry?" Seeing Shang skinning the fish, the old man sighed again, looked up at the direction of Luoyang, and murmured, "The weather is going to change." Shang buried his head in slaughtering the fish and said, "It can't be." The weather looked very clear in the evening, and it shouldn't turn cloudy. The old man ignored him, stroked his beard, and said leisurely, "When the weather changes, there will be a storm of blood. If we arrive a few days later, we will have less of the fishy smell on us. What's wrong with that?" Shang looked up and saw the old man stroking his messy beard. He couldn't help but say, Lang, you haven't washed your hands when you caught the fish just now, and now you've stroked your beard." Sure enough. The fat old man was shocked and quickly ran to the side, picked up a wooden bucket with a rope, went to the lake and filled a bucket with water, and then washed his beard. By the time he finished washing his beard, Shang had already packed the fish and sent it to Chanwan. The fat old man's face was covered in water, and there were still droplets of water dripping down from his beard, wetting the front of his shirt. He ignored it and only leaned on the side of the boat, looking into the distance, thinking about something. Shang walked to his side, followed his gaze, and looked into the distance. There was nothing to see, so he leaned on the side of the boat and said to the fat old man, Lang, the Empress has summoned you back to the capital. Is there a big use for you?" The fat old man made a "heh" sound but didn't say anything. Shang scratched his head and said, "Since Lang isn't in a hurry to return to the capital, why are we hanging around Lake Chiao? Zhongli is not far from here, and Lang has a cousin who lives in Zhongli. Why don't we go there and be guests for a few days?" The fat old man shook his head lightly and said sadly, "The Empress is in power, and Li Tang's royal family is declining day by day. Renjia as a minister can't support Li Tang's legitimacy, and I'm not willing to resign to show my noble aspirations. My cousin, Fang Zheng, is not good, and is quite dissatisfied with me. Why should I go there and ask for trouble?" So this person was Renjia. When he said this old man who had been like an old urchin with a pure heart, from the moment he rushed to the bow of the boat, had a hint of heaviness and desolation in his tone, and a hint of seriousness in his expression. He was silent for a moment, and suddenly laughed. He pointed to the flickering silver snakes in front of him, and asked, Sheng, do you know what is the strongest thing in this world?" Shing didn't waste his time thinking, and directly answered, "I don't know." Renda looked into the distance and said in a clear voice, "It's water. The hardest thing is easy to break, and the best is like water. Water lives in a good place, and its heart is kind. With good people, it speaks with good words, governs with good governance, does things with good ability, and acts with good timing. On the surface, it looks very weak, but its goal has never changed. No matter how many twists and turns it takes, it will eventually reach the place it wants to go. Shuxing said, "Water actually has so many tricks." Di Ren just sniffed and said, "Not only that, water can also be used to clean the beard. It can also be used to stew fish. This old man can already smell the fragrance. Quickly bring out the jar of Jiannan roasted spring that envoy Lu gave to this old man." After a moment of desolation, Old Di's face revealed an optimistic and cynical expression. He pulled out 2 thin ropes from under his collar and tied them around his ears. 2 silver hooks hung down, and then he separated his beard and hung it on the hooks. So the hooks he used to fish were actually his beard hooks. By the riverbank of Yi River, Wu Zetian was half lying on a bamboo couch, and a fishing rod was fixed to the side of the bamboo couch. Above her head was a yellow umbrella, providing shade for her, and the warm sunlight shone on her legs. The dark green water was very calm, and occasionally a light breeze would blow, and a fishing float would float on the surface of the water. The noble princess hurried over with small steps. Hearing the movement, Wu Zetian opened her eyes slightly. Seeing that she had arrived, she lazily said, "My dear daughter, what have you been doing so early in the morning? We have already caught 3 fish, and you have only just arrived." The noble princess laughed. Even if I had rushed to fish last night, I could not have caught more than the heavenly empress." She sat on the bed beside the couch and leaned forward and said to Wu Zetian, "Yesterday, didn't the heavenly empress say that she wanted to find a suitable husband for Taiping? How could I dare not to take it seriously? Yesterday, when I went back, I asked people to pick out all the men in the capital who are qualified to support Taiping. Didn't I choose them all morning?" Hearing this, Wu Zetian sat up with great interest and said happily, "Have you chosen?" The noble princess said, "I have carefully chosen all morning, and have chosen 5 men. Heavenly Empress, please listen and see which one is suitable." Wu Zetian laughed. All right. Speak." Saying this, she waved her hand, and the pretty maid serving her, Tuan Er, quickly presented a bowl of fermented rice. Tuan Er was Empress Wu's trusted maid, and she took care of Empress Wu's daily needs. With just a look from Wu Zetian, she would know what Empress Wu needed, and thus she was the most favored by Empress Wu. Wu Zetian drank a mouthful of fermented rice and said to the noble princess, "Tell me, I want to know which family's son has this good fortune." The noble princess said with a smile, "The first one is the minister-counselor of the Shangshu province, Ming. He is only 27 years old this year, and is already a secondary class 6th rank official. He works in the Shangshu province, and is young and promising. This Ming originally had a wife, but because he did not have any children, he divorced her, and now he is still single." Wu Zetian frowned slightly and said, "Ming, surnamed Ni? It doesn't sound like he is from a noble family." The noble princess hurriedly said, "Yes, this Ming is from an ordinary family, but he is talented and learned." Wu Zetian waved her hand slightly and said unhappily, "No, how can my beloved daughter marry a commoner from a poor family? Who is next?" Wu Zetian placed great importance on one's family background. Although when she was in power, in order to fight against the Shandong great families and Guanlong great families, she had promoted some of the children of the concubines. However, this was only for political purposes. Wu Zetian, who was born into a noble family, looked down on the poor people of the concubines. In the beginning, when her beloved daughter, Princess Taiping, married Xueshao, Wu Zetian even despised Xueshao's 2 sisters-in-law, who were of humble birth, and did not deserve to be her daughter's sisters-in-law. She issued an edict to force Xueshao's 2 elder brothers to divorce their wives. Fortunately, Xueshao's 2 elder brothers were deeply in love with their wives, and could not bear to abandon them. They hurriedly verified, that their wives came from a noble family in Jiangnan, and only then did they let it go. Even her daughter's sisters-in-law came from a poor family, and she was not willing to accept it. So how could she let her daughter marry a commoner? Therefore, the noble princess only said half of what she wanted to say before she was vetoed. The noble princess awkwardly said, these people that you have chosen, in terms of appearance, character, and learning, they are all flawless, but their background, Wu Zetian said. Could it be that the 5 people that you have carefully selected are all from poor families, and not a single one is from a noble family? Chapter 169. The noble princess said slowly, if one's family background is also suitable, I do have another candidate. It's just that this person was originally ranked the last of the 5 by me. Compared to the others in other aspects, he seems to be slightly inferior. Wu Zetian said disapprovingly, since this person is from an aristocratic family, how can he be inferior to those from poor families? Who are you talking about? The noble princess smiled and said, this person is your nephew, Empress Wu Qingxi, Minister Wu. Wu Zetian was stunned and said in surprise, Chengxi. The noble princess said, yes, in terms of status, those people naturally can't be compared to Wu. Or in terms of family background, talent, and ability, they can't even be compared. However, Wu Xiang's age was slightly older. Taiping is only 24, while Minister Wu is already in his early 40s. Chengxi. Wu Zetian didn't listen to what she said and started thinking. Li Lingyue was her most beloved daughter. Her daughter lost her husband, of course, as a mother, she would be concerned. Moreover, her daughter's husband was killed on her order, so she felt even more apologetic towards her daughter. So she wanted to make it up to her. However, because Xue Xiao had died not long ago, she also knew that her daughter and Xue Xiao were deeply in love. Xue Xiao's death must have hurt her deeply, so she didn't intend to find another husband for her so soon, and didn't think about who was more suitable. Now that the noble princess mentioned Wu Qingxi, it evoked another layer of her thoughts. Wu Zetian thought to herself, I'm about to ascend the throne and become the emperor. Once I become the emperor, the Li family's empire will belong to the Wu family. This child Lingyue has always been proud and arrogant. How can she stand being left out? If she marries a nephew of the Wu family, then she will be the daughter-in-law of the Wu family. A daughter married out is like water spilled out. Speaking of which, she will be considered a member of the Wu family. Moreover, if Lingyue marries the son of the Wu family, Wu and Li will become one then. Wu Zetian looked at her daughter with satisfaction. If it wasn't for her daughter's idea, she wouldn't have thought of this point. This way, she could solve her daughter's lifelong problem. After changing the world, she wouldn't have to worry about her daughter being suppressed and persecuted by the Wu clan. Moreover, it would greatly benefit her in obtaining the support of the world's people. It was truly killing 3 birds with 1 stone. The more Wu Zetian thought about it, the happier she became. Regarding the inheritance of the throne, although others had all kinds of speculations, she had never thought of passing it on to her daughter. Just like how Wu Zetian valued the children of the concubines, in her heart, she still valued the great family. Although she wanted to become the emperor as a woman, she had never thought about having a female crown prince. Wu Zetian was not a feminist. She only wanted to become an empress because of her personal power and status. She had no intention of changing the status of women in the world. In her mind, letting her daughter become the daughter-in-law of the Wu family was undoubtedly the best way for her daughter. Wu Zetian nodded as a joyful smile appeared on her face. Good. Very good. Qingxi is a good child. His status is also suitable for your daughter. The princess said, Yes, I also think so. It's just that the age gap is a little big. Wu Zetian rolled her eyes at her and said, A man is 10 years older than a woman, so they are of the same age. Qingxi is only 41 this year, and your daughter is 24 this year. Yes, almost the same, a good match, a very good match. Wu Zetian did what she thought. She happily turned her head and called out, "'Twanna go! Summon Taiping to see me." "Yes, your majesty." The princess's face quietly flashed a touch of pride. "I won't marry." "I said marry, so you must marry." "I would rather die." "Even if you die, you must be buried in the Wu family's ancestral grave and become the daughter-in-law of the Wu family." Princess Taiping was summoned in front of Wu Zetian. When she heard that she was going to marry Wu Qingxi, she was immediately angry. Wu Zetian's character was very strong. Seeing that her daughter was so stubborn, she could not help but be furious. After a few words, the mother and daughter were at a stalemate. The princess saw that the mother and daughter were at a stalemate and hurriedly comforted. "Empress, please calm down. Taiping, the Empress is doing this for your own good. Besides, Minister Wu's status is also suitable for you. His character and appearance are also not bad." Princess Taiping looked at her coldly. Taiping was not angry, but when she was angry, there was a sense of majesty. Her demeanor was very similar to her mother's. The princess felt a chill in her heart and could not say anything. Princess Taiping looked at Wu Zetian and said sadly, "Mother, children's lives are decided by their parents." Her daughter's lifelong partner was chosen by her mother, but her daughter's lifelong husband was also personally ordered to be killed by her mother. Now, mother wants me to marry someone, but do I like this person? Princess Taiping looked straight at Wu Zetian and looked gloomy. "It is said that mother loves me the most. But I want to ask mother, when you ordered my husband to be killed, did you care about me? Now, mother wants to choose Wu Qingxi as my husband. How much of it is for me?" Wu Zetian was unable to restrain her anger. She slapped the table and said, "If it is not for you, then who is it for? How do you know about my painstaking efforts?" Princess Taiping shook her head lightly and said bitterly, "I do not know about mother's painstaking efforts, and I do not want to know. I only know that if it was not for mother's painstaking efforts, I would not have lost my husband, and my children would not have lost their father. Mother's painstaking efforts, I really do not want to accept it anymore. You disobedient child." Wu Zetian was so angry that she trembled. Princess Taiping bowed to Wu Zetian slowly and said in a very light and cold voice, "If mother wants me to marry, I would rather become a nun again." Princess Taiping slowly straightened her back and waved her sleeves to leave. Princess Taiping looked at Princess Taiping, who left decisively, and then looked at Wu Zetian, who was so angry that she did not know what to say. Princess Taiping is going to pack up and return to Luoyang. A little palace maid hurriedly ran into Shanghai Wan Er's meditation room and reported to her. Shanghai Wan Er put down the memorial and said in surprise, "Didn't Princess say that she would stay in Dragon Gate for a few days? Why did she leave? Is there anything urgent in the city?" The little palace maid said, "I don't know. Her Highness was summoned in the morning." Her Highness came back angrily and immediately ordered people to pack up and leave Dragon Gate. "Oh." Shanghai Wanner frowned and thought for a while. She put down the brush and stood up, saying, "Let's go. Let's go see the princess." On the bank of Yi River, Princess Taiping angrily boarded a gaily painted boat with a large group of servants and ordered, "Weigh the anchor. I want to leave immediately." The boatman did not know why Princess Taiping wanted to leave in a hurry. Seeing her unhappy face, he did not dare to say anything. He hurriedly obeyed the order and set sail to leave Dragon Gate. Shanghai Wan rushed back to Princess Taiping's residence, but there was nothing. When she rushed to the bank of Yi River, she saw a big ship with its huge sail open and 2 arrows away. Along the Yi River, a large ship was sailing towards them. When it reached the checkpoint on the water, it anchored and stopped. The right guard commander Wu Yuji watched the large ship stop. Holding his sword, he boarded the ship with a heavy expression. Beside him, a thin man in green with long eyebrows bent his back slightly. He did not move an inch away from him and whispered, "General, this is the order of Minister Wu and Minister Wu." Wu Yuji raised his hand and the man did not speak. He just coldly winked at the guards behind Wu Yuji. At the bow of the ship, a general had already come to greet them. As soon as he saw Wu Yuji, he immediately bowed. Subordinate Hu Biao greets General Wu. Wu Yuji nodded with a sullen face and asked, "Has Prince of Sun been brought back?" The green-clothed, thin-faced man at the side emphasized coldly, "General Li Sujie is now a criminal, not Prince of Sun." Wu Yuji glanced at him and did not speak. The armored general cupped his fists and said, "Li Sujie and all his family have been brought back." The corner of Wu Yuji's eyes twitched, and he said in a deep voice, "Take them to the deck." The green-clothed, thin-faced man laughed coldly. His surname was Li Gui, and he was Wu Sanxi's personal attendant. Therefore, although he was domineering, the cowardly Wu Yuji did not dare to offend him easily. The Prince of Sun that Wu Yuji asked about was called Li Sujie, the fourth son of Emperor Gaozong. His biological mother was consort Xiao Shu. At the age of 6, he was conferred the title of Prince of Yong and Governor of Yong Province. At the age of 12, he was conferred the title of Prince of Sun and transferred to Qizhou Provincial Governor. After his mother, consort Xiao Shu, was killed by Wu Zetian, he was demoted to Shenzhou Provincial Governor. After that, he was transferred many times and was Shuzhou Provincial Governor before he was arrested. Zhou Xing secretly reported that Prince of Sun, Li Sujie, and Prince of Zhe, Li Shangjin, had rebelled, and Wu Zetian issued an edict to make fun of them. Prince of Sun, Li Sujie, and his family were escorted to the capital, and they happened to pass through Longmen. Because Wu Zetian was now enjoying spring at Longmen, the criminals were escorted directly here. After a while, there was a clatter of iron shackles, and a group of people were escorted out of the cabin. These people were men and women, old and young, dressed in different clothes. Some were in official clothes, some were in casual clothes, and some were in casual clothes. It was obvious that they were in different environments when they were arrested. Some were arrested outside, and some were arrested in the bedroom of the inner residence. They didn't even have time to change their clothes. As soon as they stepped on the deck, the sunlight was a little dazzling. As soon as they came out, they all narrowed their eyes. One of them was a middle-aged talent with a clear face, 3 strands of beard under his chin, and a delicate and pretty appearance. He looked to be in his 40s and was Prince of Sun Li Sujie. Prince of Sun narrowed his eyes slightly and waited until he slowly adapted to the sunlight before casting his gaze on Wu Yuji. He didn't know Wu Yuji. When he was still a teenager, he went to the local government to be an official. Later, Wu Zetian became the empress. Because she hated his mother, consort Xiao Shu, she ordered him not to return to the 2 capitals. From then on, this was the first time he had returned to Luoyang in more than 20 years. The Prince of Sun thought that when they arrived at the dock, they would take him ashore and put him in prison. But when he looked around, it was just a sentry post in the middle of the river, and there were many murderous soldiers surrounding them. He couldn't help but be a little stunned. His wife, concubines, and children saw the unkind expressions of the soldiers and couldn't help but gather around him in fear. Wu Yuji looked at the old and young family, his expression full of struggle, and didn't say a word for a long time. Li Gui took a step forward and said gloomily, "General Wu." He deliberately emphasized the word Wu. Wu Yuji's body trembled when he heard this. He suddenly clenched the hilt of his sword and said in a deep voice, "By imperial edict, Li Sujie conspires against the law. Immediately all the men in the family are to be sentenced to death. The women are to be palace slaves." Chapter 170. Li Sujie, the Prince of Sun, already had an ominous feeling when he saw the situation around him. But he still didn't dare to imagine that with his status as a prince of the Tang dynasty, he would be executed without trial. Hearing Wu Yuji's words, the Prince of Sun was shocked and said in horror, "Sujie is a member of the imperial family, a prince of the Tang dynasty. You dare?" Before Wu Yuji could answer, Li Gui stepped forward and shouted, "What are you waiting for? The general has already given the order. Why don't you act?" The warriors behind Wu Yuji swarmed forward and took down all the men of the Li family present. Li Sujia had a total of 13 sons, the oldest of whom was already an adult and the youngest was still in swaddling clothes. They were also taken from their mother's hands. The women and the young children were so frightened that they burst into tears. Li Sujia's arms were firmly clasped and his eyes were red. With tears in his eyes, he shouted with grief and indignation, "This is the Empress Dowager's order, isn't it? Isn't it?" Wu Yuji kept his mouth shut. Li Gui laughed. "What? Are you planning to lodge a complaint in the netherworld? Humph! Do it! Hang his sons first. Hang them one by one." As Li Gui spoke, the shallow pockmarks on his face became particularly obvious because of the swelling and redness of his face. He seemed to be particularly interested in the cruel scene. "Wait!" Wu Yuji shouted and stopped the soldier's actions. Li Gui suddenly turned to him, his eyes as gloomy as a spitting poisonous snake. "What does the general mean? Could it be you want to defy the will of the emperor?" Wu Yuji was well aware that this was a prince who was accused of rebellion and then executed without teaching. But he was even more clear that he couldn't disobey. Although this order came from Wu Qingxi and Wu Sanxi, it must be Wu Zetian's intention. Otherwise, even Wu Qingxi and Wu Sanxi would never dare to give such an order. If he didn't obey, he would be abandoned by the entire family. Wu Yuji gritted his teeth, suddenly turned around, waved his hand, and shouted, "There is an order of seniority. There is a distinction between superiors and subordinates. First, give Li Sujia death." What kind of cruel devastation was it for a father to watch his own flesh and blood being hanged? And he didn't just have one child, but 13. From big to small, from adults to babies, there were a total of 13 sons. The Prince of Zun had to watch helplessly as his 13 sons were hanged one by one. Wu Yuji shuddered at the thought of that resentment. The only mercy he could spare was to execute Li Sujia first. A piece of white silk was wrapped around Li Sujia's neck. Li Sujia looked up to the sky and howled in grief. "I, Li Tang, am a member of the royal family, a descendant of the royal family. When have I been reduced to a lowly dog? Heavens, Before he could finish his sorrowful cry, the white silk around his neck tightened. 2 strong men, one on the left and one on the right, with their feet in a horse stance, their hands tightened on the white silk, causing it to creak. Li Sujia's face flushed red, her eyes almost popping out of their sockets. The white silk creaked and twisted. After a long time, Li Sujia was like a taut string that suddenly snapped, suddenly softening. The white silk was still twisting, and the women's hoarse cries and shouts could be heard from the side, as well as the frightened cries of Li Sujia's young sons. The Crown Prince of Zun and several of his brothers wanted to struggle and resist, but they were shackled and their arms were twisted tightly by the strong soldiers, so they couldn't move at all. Wu Yuji didn't dare to look at this scene at all. He had already walked to the side of the boat and looked out at the leisurely river, refusing to look back. Li Gui secretly curled his lips and thought, "Trash! Your surname is also Wu." He waved his hand, and as soon as the 2 strong men let go, Li Sujia fell to the ground. According to the rules, he should cover his face with a wet towel in case the hanged person's life was great and he could still catch his breath. But when Li Sujia fell to the ground, the white silk was pulled back and his head was twisted at a strange angle. It was clear that the 2 strong men had used too much strength and had broken his neck. Li Gui chuckled and waved his hand. "Well, it's time to send our Crown Prince of Zun on his way." Wu Yuji, who turned his head to look at the water and didn't dare to look back, heard this, and the corners of his eyes twitched a few times. Next! Li Gui looked at these phoenix children and dragon grandchildren, whimpering and dying at his feet like dogs, and faintly felt a kind of morbid pleasure. Just at this time, Princess Taiping's pleasure boat slowly sailed over from the opposite side. Princess Taiping stood at the bow of the boat, the wind constantly blowing up her clothes, but her mood slowly calmed down. When she first boarded the boat, She was inexplicably angry, but as the anger disappeared, it was replaced by a bellyful of sadness. Li Tang's royal family was like a big tree whose branches were constantly being sawed off, leaving only a bare trunk. It would soon wither, rot, and collapse, but she could only watch helplessly. It was her biological mother who dug the grave for the Tang dynasty. She couldn't and was powerless to stop it. She was also a descendant of the Li family. How could she feel good watching this? And what about herself? She was also hurt by her mother again and again. Her mother loved her dearly. There was no doubt that compared to her brothers, whom her mother would kill whenever she wanted to, and who did not have a shred of motherly affection, she undoubtedly received her mother's special love and protection. However, compared to her mother's love for power and position, what was she worth? Her mother clearly knew that her husband did not participate in the rebellion, but in order to make an example of him to others, just to frighten people, even if he was her beloved daughter's husband, she could still kill him without mercy. Xue Xiao was still alive and did not hinder her mother's great cause. But just to make others more afraid, and more intensely show that those who opposed her would die, she did not hesitate to let her own daughter become a widow. She closed the palace door and kept her daughter outside. At that time, she was holding her child, who was just a month old. Mother cried, child cried. Both mother and son cried until they breathed their last. Now, the mother wanted to marry her daughter off to her nephew. Yes, what a good plan this was. The daughter-in-law of the Li family took away the Li family's empire. The son-in-law of the Li family sat on the Li family's empire. In order for her to sit on the throne, she ruthlessly took away her daughter's son-in-law. In order for the descendants of the Wu family to sit on the throne, she forcibly gave her daughter a son-in-law. Tears gradually condensed into beads of tears in Princess Taiping's eyes. She closed her eyes slightly and 2 crystal tears fell. At this moment, a cry drifted into her ears along with the wind. Princess Taiping suddenly opened her eyes and saw a large ship anchored in front of her. It was a battleship, and Princess Taiping was on a gaily painted pleasure boat. The gaily painted pleasure boat was a multi-story ship, 1 story higher than the battleship. Princess Taiping looked down and saw that the deck of the battleship in front of her was full of corpses. Bai Ling. Bai Ling was sentenced to death. Could it be an ordinary person? Princess Taiping's heart moved. She immediately pointed to the battleship and ordered, "Meet them!" "Stop!" The big ship approached. Because it stopped too quickly, the 2 ships collided slightly, and the people on both ships shook slightly. At this time, the soldiers on the battleship were putting white silk around the neck of a 9-year-old boy. This was the 10th son of Li Sujie, the Prince of Zun. On the deck, there were dead bodies lying on the ground. Li Sujie and his 9 sons had all been hanged. Seeing the tragic situation on the deck, Princess Taiping held the side of the ship with her hand. Before the big ship stopped completely, she shouted to stop the soldiers' actions. 2 maids next to her lifted the footboard and slammed it on the side of the ship, causing the battleship to shake. The plank was made of solid wood and was extremely heavy. Moreover, it was often soaked in water, so it was even heavier. Normally, it would take 7 or 8 sailors on the ship to lift the plank off the ship. Who would have thought that the 2 strong and stocky women by Princess Taiping's side would unexpectedly have such extraordinary strength, which made those sailors endlessly stunned. Princess Taiping stepped onto the footboard and walked to the bow of the battleship. She looked at the dead bodies on the ground and asked sternly, "Who are the dead? Why are you lynching them here?" Wu Yuji had already turned around when he heard the movement. Seeing the many dead bodies on the ground with their tongues sticking out and their eyes glaring, Wu Yuji was frightened and didn't dare to look any more. He hurriedly stepped forward and saluted Princess Taiping, saying, "General Wu Yuji greets Princess Taiping." The Wu family had many sons and nephews. Princess Taiping had seen Wu Yuji several times, but she couldn't remember his name. However, From the contact with those palace gatherings, she roughly understood this Wu Yuji. He was different from Wu Sanxi, Wu Qingxi, and the others. He was more reserved and docile, so she found him pleasing to the eye. She nodded and said, "So it's General Wu. What's going on? Who are the dead?" Wu Yuji said, "Princess, the dead are Prince of Zun, Li Sujie, and his son." Hearing this, Princess Taiping felt a chill in her heart. When Li Sujie's concubine, Lady Yin, heard that the person who came was Princess Taiping, she immediately struggled out from the hands of a soldier and threw herself on her knees, begging, "Princess, please save your nephew! Please save your nephew!" Her son was the boy who had just been hanged. Seeing that her son was about to be hanged, Lady Yin felt as if her heart was being cut by a knife, but she was powerless to save him. Now that she heard that Princess Taiping had arrived, even if the hope was slim, she couldn't care less. She knocked her head on the ground a few times and hurriedly pulled her son to kneel down, saying anxiously, "Stupid son, quickly kneel down. This is your aunt. Quickly beg your aunt to save your life." The child was already scared silly. Hearing his mother's words, he knelt down with a thud. The mother and son kowtowed like pounding garlic, banging on the deck. In a short moment, his forehead was already dripping with blood. Only Lady Yin was begging. The child was so scared that he couldn't speak. He only knew to follow his mother and kowtowing hard. Princess Taiping's heart trembled. As soon as she asked about the identity of the dead, she knew that this matter could not have been Wu Yuji's private execution. Prince of Zun, Li Sujie, was her half-brother. Because of the hatred between their mothers, her relationship with this brother was very cold since childhood. But after all, they were of the same bloodline. A prince of the Tang dynasty, who should have been the most distinguished person, was now strangled here like a dog. As a member of the Li family and a son of the royal family, Princess Taiping couldn't help but feel a sense of sympathy for the death of a rabbit. Especially the scene of Lady Yun and her son and other concubines and daughters of Prince of Zun kneeling down and begging made her even more miserable. She was also a mother, and just a year ago, she also lost her husband. Princess Taiping's eyes turned red. She slowly raised her head and stared at Wu Yuji. "Let them go!" Chapter 171. Princess Taiping's words were not firm because she knew that the life and death of these people did not depend on her or Wu Yuji. Wu Yuji stammered, "Your Highness, this general cannot make the decision." Princess Taiping's jade face turned cold as she lightly nodded and said, "I know. Postpone the execution. I will go see the Empress." Wu Yuji heaved a sigh of relief and said, "This general obeys." Li Gui jumped out and said coldly, "What right does your Highness have to interfere with the imperial court's affairs? General Wu, you dare to disobey the Empress' decree?" Princess Taiping looked at his attire and frowned slightly. "Who are you?" Li Gui puffed out his chest and replied loudly, "Wu Yuji greets Princess Taiping." Princess Taiping's phoenix eyes flashed with killing intent and her lips curled into a cold smile. She nodded slightly and said, "Good. This princess cannot interfere with the imperial court's affairs. This princess also cannot interfere with the imperial court's affairs. But you, this lowly talent, can jump out and point fingers?" Li Gui was slightly angry and retorted, "Your Highness, this lowly one is following Minister Wu's order." He did not finish his words when Princess Taiping flicked her sleeve and said in a deep voice, "Take down this arrogant dog for me." Under Princess Taiping's command, the two maids immediately rushed forward in large strides. Li Gui still wanted to resist, but the two maids were sumo masters. How could they let him succeed? They separated to the left and right, raising their hands to catch him. Like an eagle catching a chick, they held him in their hands. His arms and the hands of the two fat maids were like two reeds. Princess Taiping said, "Tie him up and throw him into the river." Li Gui was not afraid when he was being held, but when he heard Princess Taiping's words, he could not help but be shocked and said, "Princess Taiping, I am Minister Wu's man. You dare to kill me? Princess Taiping smiled coldly and said to Wu Yuji, This princess is going to see the Empress. General Wu, please wait for a moment. Wu Yuji hurriedly said, Wu Yuji will wait for the princess news. Princess Taiping flicked her sleeve and left. The two maids next to her had already gagged Li Gui's mouth and used the white silk as a rope to tie him up tightly. They were still worried that Li Gui would not sink into the water, so they stuffed a big stone into his bosom to tie him up. By the time Princess Taiping got off the boat and went ashore, the tightly tied up Li Gui had already been thrown into the river. With a splash, Li Gui, who was hugging the big stone and tied up like a baby, quickly sank into the water. The water rippled, and not even a few bubbles appeared. Wu Zetian had already returned to the temporary imperial residence. Her daughter's resistance had made her extremely angry, but once she had made a decision, no one could change it. Perhaps when she was still a talented person, a Jiaoyi, she would succumb to the will of others and do things that went against her will, but that was already a very long time ago. In these decades, no one dared to go against her will. When she was still the empress, Gao Zong and Shangguan plotted to abolish the empress. When she got the news, she rushed to the emperor's palace and sternly asked Gao Zong why he abolished the empress and if she had done anything wrong. At that time, no matter how tough her attitude was, there was still a trace of fear in her heart. If Gao Zong insisted on abolishing the empress, no matter how tough she was, she would not be able to escape the ending of being banished to the cold palace. But Gao Zong was far more cowardly than she had imagined. He panicked and denied it, and he blushed and pushed all the blame to Shangguan Yi. It was from that time that she began to realize how strong she was. It was from that time that she began to try to control her husband, the emperor, in her hands. Now, she no longer needed to look at anyone's face, nor did she need to change her mind because of anyone, even if it was her own daughter. When Wu Zetian returned to the temporary imperial residence, she gradually calmed down. Seeing that the mother and daughter quarreled with each other, the princess really regretted it. She accepted the benefits from Wu Qingxi and was blinded by greed. She tried to pull the strings, but she did not expect that Princess Taiping would react so strongly. She was worried that Empress Wu would give up this matter because of her daughter's reaction, and it would be hard to explain to Wu Qingxi. She was also worried that after Princess Taiping forced the marriage, she would resent her. The more she thought about it, the more upset she became. After a while, Shanghai Wanner sent a message saying that Princess Taiping had left in anger. The princess was even more afraid. She clung to Wu Zetian and talked about all kinds of things. While comforting Wu Zetian, she was also thinking about how to turn this matter around and not offend anyone. Before she could come up with a comprehensive plan, Tuaner suddenly rushed in and reported to Wu Zetian, "Empress, Princess Taiping wants to see you." Wu Zetian and the princess were both stunned. Wu Zetian said curiously, since she returned to the city in anger, "Why did she come to see me? This is not that girl's character." The princess hurriedly said, "I think Taiping has changed her mind. Maybe she has thought it through. Empress, please see her quickly and see what Taiping has to say." Wu Zetian nodded and ordered, "Let her in." After a while, Princess Taiping walked into the room. Wu Zetian snorted coldly with a sullen face and said, "You have really grown up and your wings have hardened. How dare you complain to your mother? Since you have gone back to Luoyang, why did you come back?" Princess Taiping said, "Mother, I came back because of Prince Sun." Wu Zetian's face sank and said, "Prince Sun? What does Prince Sun's matter have to do with you?" Princess Taiping knelt down on both knees and said in a sorrowful voice, "Mother, I met the ship escorting Prince Sun halfway. It was at the Longmen Inn. Prince Sun and his son were hanged on the bow of the ship. The scene was horrible. Mother, when I arrived, Prince Sun and his 9 sons had all been hanged. Now there are only 4 young sons left. Mother, please show mercy and pardon them from death." Wu Zetian said in a deep voice, Prince Sun's rebellion is unforgivable. As a girl, you shouldn't meddle in state affairs. Princess Taiping smiled sadly. She should have expected that this was the reaction her mother should have. When she begged her to pardon her innocent and harmless husband's life, her mother didn't allow it. How could she let Prince Sun's life go now? But she still held a trace of fantasy and wanted to beg her. If her mother could be moved by the affection of children, she wouldn't be her. Princess Taiping took a long breath and slowly raised her head. Mother! Prince Sun and his 9 sons have been hanged, leaving only 4 young sons, the oldest of whom is less than 10 years old. Even if Prince Sun rebelled, how could a few urchins less than 10 years old participate in it? I beg Mother to pardon them from death. If Mother agrees, I am willing to marry the Wu family's daughter-in-law. Wu Zetian stared at Taiping for a long time. Her eyebrows were slightly raised and a smile appeared on her lips. She turned to Tuan and said, You go and pass on my decree. Prince Sun and his 9 sons will be buried with the rights of commoners. All the concubines and daughters will pretend to be palace slaves, leaving the 4 young sons. Wu Zetian pondered for a moment and said, They will all be sent to Laizhou in Lingnan and be strictly guarded by the local government. Tuan agreed and retreated. The Prince of Sun, Li Sujia, as well as Li Ying, Li Wan, Li Ji, Li Yi, and the rest of the 9 sons were all dead. They were casually buried as commoners. The remaining 4 sons, Li Lin, Li Guan, Li Ji, and Li Qinggu, were pardoned from death by Princess Taiping's promise of marriage. After Wu Zetian finished her instructions, she smiled at Princess Taiping and said, Daughter, get up. I want you to marry into the Wu family for your own good. Besides, you are still young. Do you really want to be a widow for a lifetime? Hee, it just so happens that my daughter, the matchmaker, is also here. Let's discuss your marriage. When Princess Taiping heard Wu Zetian say the word daughter with a pleasant expression, she felt an inexplicable chill in her heart and an indescribable sorrow. What kind of mother and daughter are they? Everything can be used for the exchange of interests, including her own marriage. How vulnerable is family affection in the face of power and interests? Princess Taiping couldn't help but be overjoyed when she saw that things had developed to this point. She hurriedly said, Our royal family has not held a happy event for a long time. Taiping getting married is a great happy event, especially marrying Minister Wu, a talented man and a beautiful woman, well matched in social status. We have to plan carefully. Princess Taiping already hated her to the core. She glanced at her coldly and said, Who said I am going to marry Wu Qingxi? As soon as the sentence was said, both Wu Zetian and Princess Taiping were startled. Wu Zetian said angrily, Ling Yue, are you going back on your words? Princess Taiping said boldly, Your daughter will always keep her words. How can I go back on my words? What's more, Mother has made up her mind. How can your daughter go back on her words? However, your daughter has agreed to marry Wu Qingxi, but not Wu Qingxi. Wu Zetian asked curiously, If you don't marry Wu Qingxi, who do you want to marry? Princess Taiping's eyes flashed and said, Wu Yuji. Princess Taiping was dumbfounded. Wu Zetian thought for a while and said, Yuji? Oh, that child. I remember. If I remember correctly, Yuji has a wife. Princess Taiping knew that Taiping hated her to the core. At this moment, she couldn't care less. She quickly said, That's right, Taiping. Wu Yuji's wife is still alive and well. Moreover, their relationship is very harmonious. How can... Princess Taiping ignored her and only said to Wu Zetian, Your daughter agrees to marry Wu Qingxi. However, if your daughter wants to marry, I will only marry Wu Yuji. Mother can't even satisfy your daughter's small wish? Wu Zetian frowned slightly and said he already has a wife. Princess Taiping smiled slightly, a desolate smile with a touch of provocation. That is your problem, Mother. You can force your daughter to marry, but can't you force Wu Yuji to marry? She looked coldly at the noble princess again, nodded slightly and turned around to leave. Princess Taiping looked at Wu Zetian in fear and stammered, "Empress!" Wu Zetian was silent for a while. Suddenly she laughed loudly. "Ha ha ha ha! Good, good. You are indeed my daughter. Ha ha ha. Ling Yue's character is very similar to mine." Princess Taiping tentatively called out, "Empress!" Wu Zetian stopped laughing and said, "Let's do it this way. I can't wrong her too much. Let her marry Wu Yuji." Princess Taiping was at a loss. "But Wu Yuji has a wife?" Wu Zetian calmly glanced at her, and the noble princess immediately felt a chill run down her spine. Chapter 172. In the courtyard of the temple, under the shade of a tree, several guards were sitting there, laughing and chatting. Xia Xiaoman suddenly walked over, stopped a few feet away, and coughed. One of the guards who were chatting noticed her and hurriedly signaled to the others. The guards all stood up. Xia Xiaoman pointed at Yang Fan with a straight face, shook her head, and took the lead to leave. Yang Fan straightened his clothes, patted the dust off his buttocks, and followed behind Xia Xiaoman. Immediately, there was a hissing sound behind him. "Hey, Beta Persei is amazing. Isn't that Xie Due from His Majesty? Isn't he? Recently, he has been hanging out with our Beta Persei." "Aya, you mean? Guess! Ha 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 ha!" The guards were unscrupulous, talking all at once, their words full of ambiguity. Xia Xiaoman was angry listening to them. Her waist swayed, her long legs staggered, and the more she walked, the more powerful she became. Although her demeanor gave off a feeling of anger, the curves of her chest, waist, and thighs were smooth and slender, and when she walked with big strides, there was still an indescribable charm. Xia Xiaoman led Yang Fan into the woods, and with a leap, she turned around in midair, lightly sat on a horizontal branch, and stretched out her hand to pat the side. Yang Fan, still using both hands and feet, quickly climbed up, sat next to her, and said with a smile, "This place is beautiful. The scenery is pleasant. Miss Xiaoman invited me here. I wonder if you want to talk about love or love?" Xia Xiaoman gave him a big eye roll and said with a straight face, "I see you as a brother. Don't tease me, okay?" Yang Fan laughed and made a face. "The problem is the brothers and the guards don't think so." Xia Xiaoman said angrily, "Don't say it. The two of you are talking about love, causing me to be pointed at." As he spoke, he took out something from his sleeve and fiercely threw it into Yang Fan's arms. It was a small bag made of deerskin. Yang Fan opened it in surprise and saw a bronze plate and a paper crane in the bag. Yang Fan took the glistening yellow bronze medallion and saw the words 100 Riders engraved on it. Xia Xiaoman said she wouldn't look at it, but she glanced at the things inside the bag. When she saw the words 100 Riders, Xia Xiaoman couldn't help but exclaim, "100 Riders! You became a member of the Yuan Tsong Imperial Guard?" Yang Fan laughed and said, "That's right. Your guards are also part of the Yuan Tsong Imperial Guard. I used to say that you, Xie Due, can't control me, Yang Fan, but now you really have become my boss. If you deliberately make things difficult for me in the future, it will be terrible." Xia Xiaoman said resentfully, "Only great General Wu can mobilize the 100 Riders. Now I really can't control you." Yang Fan said, "It seems that Miss Xiaoman is very regretful. Could it be that you like to control me?" Xia Xiaoman clutched her stomach and made a vomiting gesture. Yang Fan laughed and put away the fish talisman, then carefully opened the paper crane. When the paper was unfolded, he tilted the letter slightly in his direction. Xia Xiaoman curled her lips and said, "What are you hiding? Who wants to see it?" Yang Fan unfolded the paper and saw a line of beautiful small words on it. "Things have taken shape. Keep the fish talisman for now. As for the mobilization of the troops, we will go back to the city. Tonight at 2 o'clock at night, I hope to meet with Lang Jun. I have something to tell you." The location written at the back was her room. Yang Fan knew that some specific matters should not be written too clearly on a piece of paper, so she wanted him to go talk to her face to face. But with Shanghai Oner's power, it was very easy to transfer an imperial guard to the 100 riders. There was no need to talk to him and discuss anything. This was just an excuse for her longing. This woman was like water, but when she was aroused, she was as hot as fire. Yang Fan's heart was filled with joy. He carefully put the letter away. Xie Xiaoman saw that after he finished reading the letter, even the corners of his eyes were relaxed. His heart was filled with joy. She snorted and said, "What did he say? Why are you so happy?" Yang Fan smiled and said, "Didn't you say you don't want to know?" Xie Xiaoman wrinkled her nose and said, "If you don't want to tell me, then forget it." She looked up and down at Yang Fan and said, "It's really strange. Shangguandai Zhao is such a great woman. How could she like you?" Yang Fan sighed and said, "After all, not all women in this world have eyes but can't see." Xie Xiaoman snorted and couldn't help but laugh. "I finally found a good point about you." Yang Fan said, "What good point?" Xie Xiaoman put her hands on the tree trunk and swung her legs. "Thick skin, thicker than the city wall." Yang Fan smiled and said, "Slowly you will find more good points about me." Xie Xiaoman said, "I am very busy. How can I have time to find your good points?" Yang Fan said, "Busy with what? Busy with making money." During the days in the palace, Yang Fan gradually learned about Xie Xiaoman's nickname, Miser, and couldn't help but tease her. Xie Xiaoman said, "If I am not busy with making money, I really don't know what I should be busy with." She looked into the distance, lost in thought. Yang Fan could see that she had something on her mind, but he didn't know what she was thinking about. Xie Xiaoman was stunned for a while, then suddenly turned around to look at Yang Fan and said seriously, "So you are a person who mingles in the streets? Maybe you have some skills that I don't know about. I would like to ask you for advice." Yang Fan puffed out his chest and said, "Ah, you finally think that I have some use? Tell me. I will tell you everything I know." Xie Xiaoman looked at him expectantly and said, "If you want to find someone but you don't know where they are, what they look like, or what their name is, but you only know a few things about their childhood, how are you going to find them?" Yang Fan was startled and said, "I don't know anything. How am I going to find them?" Xie Xiaoman's expression became gloomy, and she smiled bitterly. "Yes. How am I going to find them? I was thinking too much." Yang Fan looked at her sad face and was a little reluctant. He couldn't help but ask, "Do you owe this person a favor or a grudge?" Xie Xiaoman said, "What does this have to do with me looking for them?" Yang Fan said, "Of course it has something to do with it. If it is a grudge, you only need to leak a bit of information, and they will disappear without a trace. You don't have many clues to begin with, and the more you make it public, the harder it will be to find them. If it is a favor, or to find a relative, then there is nothing to worry about." How did you find them?" Xie Xiaoman stammered. I hired people to look around." Yang Fan said, "This method is actually not bad, but you need to know something about the other party so that you can follow the map. If it is like what you said just now, that you only remember some things about the other party when they were young, then this method is purely based on luck. Why don't you put up some kinship notices?" Xie Xiaoman said in a daze. "Hints? What is that?" Yang Fan rubbed his forehead and said, "Did you live in the palace since you were young? How can you not know this kind of thing? The so-called hints are like the government's notices. You can go to the streets and alleys, except for the city gate and the government office. Where can't you put them up?" Xie Xiaoman muttered to herself, "Yes. Such a simple method. Why didn't I think of it? What's the big deal with me putting up notices all over the street? The government can put up notices, so can I. Idiot. I really am a big idiot." Yang Fan said with a smile, "To tell you the truth, I also thought of this method by accident, and I plan to use this method in the future to find— Oh, I mean if I have a relative that I can't find, I will use this method to find them." Xie Xiaoman didn't notice Yang Fan's hurried change of words. She was immersed in her own fantasy. fantasizing about using this method to put up notices all over the Guangzhou prefecture looking for elder brother, imagining that her elder brother had already been found. The more Xiaoman thought about it, the more excited she became, straightened her back, and jumped down from the tree. Yang Fan said, "Hey, where are you going?" Xie Xiaoman waved at him and said, "That's a good idea. I will immediately find someone to arrange it. When I find him, I will definitely come with him to thank you properly." Yang Fan said, "That's not enough. You also have to promise people a lot of money on the notices. That way there will be a lot of people who will help you. Once the news spreads, as long as he is still alive, there is no need to worry about not being able to find him." Xie Xiaoman slapped her forehead, said, "Yes, good idea, good idea. I will go arrange it right now." Finished speaking, she turned and ran away. Yang Fan looked at her back and shook his head with a smile. This girl, she's so impatient. She's just listening to the wind and hearing the rain. Well, who is she looking for? Could it be like me? Also have relatives who were separated when they were young? The crescent moon was like a hook, hooking people's emotions. That night, Shanghai Wan accompanied Princess Taiping to drink a few cups of wine. After returning to her residence, she saw that it was still early for her appointment with Yang Fan, so she wanted to find something to do. She opened a book between the lines. It was full of her lover's voice and smile. She picked up a brush to write a few lines. It was not as lively and natural as usual. She sat cross-legged and played the zither, only to feel restless. In the end, she could only open the window and look at the crescent moon in the sky, watching the shadow of the trees slanting, waiting. Watching the crescent moon rise inch by inch, it was almost time for her appointment with her lover. A burst of light footsteps sounded. A clear woman's voice came from outside the door. "Shengguan is waiting for the imperial edict. Have you rested?" Hearing the voice, Shanghai Wan recognized that it was the Empress Dowager's personal maid Tuan. She couldn't help but be startled, stood up and said, "Is it Tuan? I haven't slept yet. What's the matter?" Tuan said, "The Empress summons. Please follow me to see her quickly." Shanghai Wan let out a soft and said in surprise, "The Empress summons at this time?" Looking at the crescent moon, Shangguan Wan was so anxious that she turned around in circles. But since the Empress had summoned her, how could she not go? She stamped her feet, forced herself to open the door, and followed Tuan out. At this time, Yang Fan saw that it was almost time, so he rushed to Shanghai Wan's residence. Wu Zetian was still awake at this time. Her nephew Wu Sanxi suddenly asked to see her and secretly discussed with her about the reform to become the emperor. Wu Sanxi left Wu Qingxi and asked to see his aunt alone, also with the intention of asking for her favor. Wu Zetian listened to his various preparations and was very satisfied. Suddenly, she thought of the Deyunjing shoe made by Xue Huai and felt that it was time to take it out, so she urgently summoned Shanghai Wan to see her. Chapter 173. Wu Sanxi saw that the Empress was very satisfied with his series of actions and could not help but feel proud. He suddenly thought of something else and said carefully, "And the matter of Li Sujie and his son being hanged at the Dragon Gate and has caused a great commotion in the capital. I think it is not good to act against Li Shangjin immediately. Right now, Li Shangjin's entire family has been escorted to the capital and is in prison. What do you think? Li Shangjin was the third son of Emperor Gaozong. His mother was Lady Yang. If he also died of Emperor Gaozong's sons, other than Li Dan and Li Xian, who were born to Wu Zetian, there would be no other sons." Wu Zetian thought for a moment and slowly said, "The evidence of Li Shangjin's treason is conclusive. I heard that he knew that once he entered the capital, he would not be able to survive and had many thoughts of suicide along the way." Wu Sanxi understood and hurriedly said, "Yes, Li Shangjin had many thoughts of suicide along the way, but was fortunately stopped by the escorting soldiers. Otherwise, he would have died on the road. There is no guarantee that he would not have thoughts of suicide in prison. But his 6 sons," Wu Zetian said faintly, "rebellion is an unpardonable crime. We cannot ignore the laws of the country. The death penalty can be avoided, but the punishment cannot be forgiven. Let's exile them to Xianzhou. As for Li Shangjin's concubines and daughters, they will be treated the same as Li Sujia. Send them to Yeding to be palace maids." Saying this, she looked deeply at Wu Sanci. Wu Sanci understood and hurriedly said, "Yes, I will arrange this matter as soon as I return." Saying this, Wu Sanci stood up with his hands on his knees and said with concern, "It is late. Aunt, please rest. I will take my leave." Wu Zetian said, "Wait, I still have one more thing to do. I'll leave it to you." Wu Sanci was slightly surprised and hurriedly said, "Aunt, please speak." Wu Zetian said in a low voice, "This matter is Taiping's marriage." Wu Sanci said with surprise, "Princess Taiping wants to marry? Aunt, which family's son has caught your eye?" Yang Fan's identity as one of the 100 Horsemen was tantamount to having a pass to roam the imperial palace. Apart from a few areas that could only be guarded by the inner guards of the imperial army, he could freely enter and exit other areas. The so-called Yuan was the beginning. The Yuan Tsong imperial army was the personal army that had followed the emperor from the very beginning. This army was the first army that followed Li Yuan, so they were the most trusted and had great power. On the other hand, the 100 Horsemen and inner guards were the guards of the imperial guards chosen by Yuan from the imperial army. Naturally, they had more authority. In reality, the imperial guards of the imperial guards were only the emperor and naturally had more power. After Wu Zetian gained control of this force, she was a woman and needed Marquis Tianhou to protect her. It would not be appropriate to use all the men. Secondly, she needed to do some secret things and needed a force more secretive than the 100 Horsemen. That was why she developed the inner guard. Since Yang Fan was one of the 100 Horsemen, it was easy for him to enter the temple where Shanghai Wana lived. Shangguan Wanner's residence was not far from Wu Zetian's residence. In order to facilitate Wu Zetian's summons, Shangguan Wanner lived in the courtyard in front of Wu Zetian's residence. After Princess Taiping, Li Lingyue moved into the Dragon Gate, she also lived here. The main hall of the Zen temple was the place for receiving guests, as well as the place where Shanghai Wanner handled government affairs. The two main rooms on the left and right were the residences of Shanghai Wanner and Princess Taiping, respectively. Yang Fan came to the Zen temple. There were some palace maids coming in and out of the Zen temple from time to time. Seeing that he was dressed as a guard, they did not pay attention to him. Yang Fan already knew where Shanghai Wana lived. He strolled around the courtyard as if patrolling. When he saw that there was no one in the courtyard, he suddenly flashed to the door of Shanghai Wanner's room and lightly knocked on the door several times. No one answered. Yang Fan frowned slightly and gently pushed the door open. Yang Fan flashed in. The room was empty. There was a zither on the table and a book on the table. The window was half open and insects were chirping. A delicate fragrance was curling up from the incense burner. These days, Yang Fan had long known Shanghai Wanner's character. She would not imitate the noble princess, not wearing a single piece of clothing and lying on the bed waiting for him. However, seeing that there was no one in the room, Yang Fan still subconsciously went behind the screen and looked inside. In front of the dressing table, there was a dressing mirror. Because it was a mountain residence, in order to prevent mosquitoes and flies from entering the tent, the curtain on the bed was hanging down. The plain white curtain was illuminated by the light. The quilt in the tent was neatly folded. There was indeed no one in the room. Yang Fan was very puzzled. Shanghai Wana had asked him to come, but why was he nowhere to be seen? Yang Fan wanted to wait for her in the room for a while, but he was worried that if she came back, there would be a maid following her. It would be inappropriate for him to be seen by others. After thinking for a while, he quietly left. Yang Fan flashed out of Er's room and bent down to pluck a bunch of wild grass from the bushes outside the window. His hands moved nimbly and quickly weaved it into something. He gently tossed it onto the table through the window, smiled lightly, and then turned to leave. At this time, the lights in the various houses were lit one after another. Some of the palace maids and inner attendants had also finished their tasks and returned to their rooms to rest. The monastery was silent. Yang Fan raised his head to look at the rising moon. Just as he was about to return to his lodging, he suddenly heard a surprised exclamation. Then someone called out, "Yang Fan!" Yang Fan turned his head and saw two windows separated to the left and right. Inside the window stood a beautiful figure. There was a candle in front of the window. The candlelight shone on her dress, making it look like clouds or fog. Her graceful figure was also faintly discernible and extremely seductive. It was Princess Taiping. When Yang Fan turned his head, Princess Taiping couldn't help but say sweetly, "It really is you. Come in." Yang Fan didn't think that he would be discovered by her. He secretly complained in his heart. He had no choice but to bite the bullet and go to the door. He softly said, "Your Highness." "Come in." Princess Taiping lazily responded. Yang Fan pushed the door open and went in. Princess Taiping had already closed the window. She lazily sat in front of the table and slightly raised her eyes to look at him. Princess Taiping reclined on a beauty couch. In front of her was a table. On the table there was a delicate glass lamp. Her room was also a meditation room. However, in the room there was a spring stool, a small table, an incense burner, a mirror, a curtain, a bed, a gauze quilt, and an embroidered pillow. It was strangely gorgeous and comfortable. Compared to Warner's room, the style was simple and elegant. Princess Taiping was obviously drunk. Her cheeks were flushed and her starry eyes were a bit hazy. She held a white jade cup and gently brought it to her lips. She slowly took a sip of wine. She felt the mellow and sweet wine flowing down her throat and into her lungs. She asked Yang Fan, "Why are you in this meditation room?" Yang Fan had already thought of a set of words in a hurry. He said, "Oh, Yang Fan has already been transferred to the 100 Horsemen. From now on, I will be the Emperor's bodyguard. I have to familiarize myself with the terrain and layout of the important places. Just now, I came to the courtyard for a walk. I was about to go somewhere else when I didn't expect to meet the princess. 100 Horsemen." Princess Taiping frowned slightly. Of course, she knew what 100 Horsemen meant. In reality, even if she was the beloved daughter of the Empress, she could not interfere with the affairs of the Yuan Tsung Imperial Army. At the beginning, she was able to transfer Yang Fan from the Jinwu Wei into the palace to be a big horn. This was a matter of a few words. But if she wanted to transfer Yang Fan into the Yuan Tsung Imperial Army, it would be very difficult. Now, Yang Fan not only became the Yuan Tsung Imperial Army, but also directly entered the 100 Horsemen. If this was not because Wu Xiuyi liked him, but because someone else did it on purpose, then this person's power was even greater than hers. Therefore, Princess Taiping instinctively felt that there was more to it than meets the eye. But now, she was already drunk and her mind was a mess. She had no energy to think about this. She casually waved her hand, as if she was waving away the worries and troubles in her heart. She said, "Sit down. Accompany me to drink a few cups." Yang Fan hurriedly said, "I still have official business to do. Moreover, in the dead of night, regardless of my status, a man and a woman alone, how can I sit and drink with the princess?" Princess Taiping giggled and looked at him with her charming big eyes. She said, "I couldn't tell that you are so timid. I am not afraid, so what are you afraid of? I told you to sit down, so sit down. Are you afraid that I will eat you? Sit down." As Princess Taiping said this, she sat up from the couch. She was wearing a light red gauze dress. Because she was hot after drinking, she took off the silk cloak. She was only wearing a spring gown that was as thin as a cicada's wing. It had some hazy and soft colors. The soft evening gown couldn't cover her beauty. As she sat up, the light gauze dress hung down close to her body. The gown was wide open, revealing her white, jade-like breasts. A small part of the crimson mandarin ducks playing in the water was exposed, revealing a deep and seductive ravine in front of her chest. Yang Fan didn't dare to look too much. He hurriedly lowered his head. He saw that under that slender waist, under the thin gauze dress, was a pair of long, round, and perfectly straight thighs. Unexpectedly, the curves were revealed, faintly revealing the color of flesh. The pair of elegant jade feet stepped on the soft carpet. Unexpectedly, she didn't even wear shoes. Yang Fan lowered his gaze again. He didn't know where to look. Princess Taiping saw his slightly embarrassed expression. She was slightly startled at first. Then she understood and couldn't help but giggle. She was forced to agree to her mother's request to marry into the Wu family. At the same time, she also gave her mother the order that she would not marry anyone other than Wu Yuji. Those people in the Wu family were like chickens and dogs that rose to heaven when one person achieved the Tao. In Princess Taiping's eyes, those people in the Wu family were really a group of useless chickens and pottery dogs. None of them could be successful. She didn't put any of them in her eyes. She knew that she had no way to resist her mother, who had always been strong. She could only marry into the Wu family and give her mother the order that she would not marry anyone other than Wu Yuji. Of course, it was out of revenge. On the other hand, it was also because she knew that Wu Yuji was weak and couldn't be restrained. She had to listen to her mother's order. She didn't want to be manipulated by another Wu family member like Wu Sanxi or Wu Qingxi to continue manipulating her. But because of this, Wu Yuji was a person she despised. He was forced to marry into the Wu family. Moreover, he was the trash that she had picked out personally. Princess Taiping could imagine the bitterness in her heart. Now, she finally found a way to vent her anger and humiliate the Wu family. She wanted to give herself to the man in front of her. Chapter 174. That night, Princess Taiping took Sheng Wanwan along to drink with her. Later on, Wan couldn't hold her liquor anymore, remembering that her Lang Jun was coming. She didn't want to show her drunkenness in front of her Lang Jun, so she found an excuse to slip away, leaving her to drink alone. Princess Taiping was drunk. Not only was she upset, but she also felt stuffy. She wanted to open the window to take a few breaths of fresh air, but she didn't expect to meet Yang Fan. In the beginning, she only wanted Yang Fan to drink with her. She really didn't have any other thoughts. However, she was wearing the revealing clothes of a girl's boudoir. Yang Fan couldn't help but feel restrained when he saw her. This kind of expression in her eyes evoked a strange feeling in her. Looking at Yang Fan's handsome face, young and tall figure, and his bright and energetic aura, her eyes gradually narrowed like a cat's. Standing in front of her, Yang Fan seemed to have become a fish under the claws of a cat. This handsome young man, without a doubt, was to her liking. At this moment, in the quiet room under the lamp, a man and a woman were alone. A strange feeling and desire was quickly fermented, released, and diffused by her drunkenness. A kind of pleasure made her body couldn't help but tremble before it was lingering. This kind of pleasure was not only because she had been alone for more than a year and couldn't sleep, but also a mature woman's desire for a man and a woman's love. It was also a kind of pleasure of revenge. I am the noble princess of the Tang dynasty. You can force me to marry into the Wu family, but you can't restrict me. I can be the daughter-in-law of the Wu family, but that's all. Princess Taiping's eyes gradually brightened. She slowly stood up and walked step by step towards Yang Fan. Her eyes were charming and watery, rippling with a sense of charm. That pair of plump and sexy lips made people want to kiss them at first sight. She was wearing a red gauze nightgown. Her hair hung down her temples. She was slender and elegant. Her slender and coquettish figure was fascinating. Yang Fan uneasily took a step back and said, "Princess." Princess Taiping gracefully walked to him and stared at him with her moist eyes. She suddenly opened her arms and wrapped around his body like a snake. Her plump and strong chest was tightly pressed against his chest. Yang Fan was shocked. He didn't know whether to push or raise his hands. He could only passively hang there. Princess Taiping softly stuck to him and moved her hot lips to his ear. With a sigh, she whispered, "If a man has never had a woman, he will always be a child who can't grow up. Xiao Fan, let me teach you how to be a man tonight." Taiping's spring gown was too thin. She hugged Yang Fan, and the plump and soft feeling was clearly transmitted to Yang Fan through every point between them. Yang Fan's body was stiff. No matter how much he had heard about the affairs between men and women, it was two different things when he had personal contact with it. He had kissed Wan Er's little mouth, held her little hand, and hugged her slender waist. But he had never had such intimate contact with a graceful and attractive female body. For a moment, Yang Fan's heart was beating like a drum. He felt his mouth was dry. Princess Taiping whispered in his ear. Her lips slid to his lips and gently kissed him. Then she opened her arms and took a step back. She gave him a charming and shy smile and gently pulled the hahuan knot on her waist in an impeccably beautiful and graceful posture. Her shoulders were slightly shaved. That silky, smooth, and soft robe was like a light cloud that slowly floated down. A graceful and fragrant body appeared in front of Yang Fan. She had a snow-white body. Her skin was as soft and smooth as white jade. It was pink and lovely. Round and smooth shoulders, delicate and alluring breasts that could not be covered by the chest apron suddenly appeared, sending a kind of lively and fragrant smell to the tip of his nose. She was also wearing a bra and a pair of soft and translucent underpants. But these didn't have any effect on her exquisite and curvaceous body. Instead, they added to her endless temptation. That snow-white and smooth body was almost naked. Her plump twin peaks trembled in front of Yang Fan's nose. It seemed that if he lowered his head, he would be able to touch the warm jade fragrance. 7 years of harmonious and blissful married life had turned her into a ripe peach. Yang Fan was so nervous that he didn't dare to raise his head. But as soon as he lowered his head, he saw a pair of slender and round thighs, a pair of snow-white feet, and a slightly indented crimson underpants between her legs. All of this, through a kind of delicate and round lines, exuded an enchanting brilliance. Under the light, it was presented in front of him, alluring and charming. This feeling was not something that any normal man could resist, let alone a young man like Yang Fan who was full of vigor. His mouth was not only dry, but at this time his blood was boiling. "No, I came here today to see Wan Er," Yang Fan kept reminding himself in his heart. But in the face of this irresistible temptation, his willpower was getting weaker and weaker. Princess Taiping stared at him. Her pair of watery eyes were quietly covered with a layer of lustrous and moving mist. It was a kind of silent invitation. How many men in the world could resist the temptation of such a stunner? "Stay with me. I want a man. I want you to be my man." Princess Taiping, who had taken off her clothes, walked over again and gently hugged Yang Fan. Her graceful body, through ingenious twisting, further stimulated his desire. Her pair of slippery and hot lips, from the tip of Yang Fan's nose, lips kissed inch by inch to his earlobe. She gently bit it, causing Yang Fan to say, "Clever! Do you know, I'm going to marry someone, and I'm going to marry a waist. I don't want to marry him, but I have no other choice. Everyone wants to use me, manipulate me, then I'll personally pick out a waist. Waist also has its advantages, isn't it? Haha, at least he can't control me, manipulate me. Haha, I'll make you come to my side and let you accompany me. Tonight you're mine. In the future you'll be mine. Forever." Yang Fan's willpower was almost lost in this lively scene, but when he heard this sentence, he suddenly sobered up. He resisted the temptation of desire with his great willpower and gently pushed away Princess Taiping. He stared at her and said, "Princess, do you want me to be the second Shui Huai?" Princess Taiping's eyes rippled, and she giggled. What's wrong with being Shui Huai? You see how powerful he is. He is the White Horse Temple's abbot, and you are the White Horse Temple's chief monk. He serves my mother, and you serve me. It's a match made in heaven. Mother loves Shui Huai very much, and sister will also love you very much in the future. As she said this, she used her fingers to gently stroke Yang Fan's nose, eyebrows. Sheng Guanwen also did the same action to him. At that time, Yang Fan had a feeling of being loved, appreciated, and spoiled by his own woman. That kind of feeling was very pleasant, and he was very proud. But when Princess Taiping's fingers gently stroked his cheek, he felt that he was a pet waiting to be sold, or a plaything in her palm. Yang Fan gently grabbed her hand and slowly took it away from his face. He said in a deep voice, "Princess, Yang Fan is a man and he won't be a gigolo. Even if Princess is as beautiful as a fairy, Yang Fan will not break his backbone." Princess Taiping was slightly startled, and then she suddenly understood. She couldn't help but laugh. "You're really a child. Are you jealous? Sister is going to be someone else's wife soon. It's you who stole his wife, and not him who stole your woman. Princess, you're very beautiful." The surging desire in the bottom of Yang Fan's heart was gradually controlled, and his eyes gradually recovered its clarity. His voice also became firm. "You're so beautiful that any man will want to have you, but I won't. My woman can only belong to me, even if you're a noble princess. Otherwise, I'd rather not have you." Princess Taiping looked at him in surprise, and her eyes gradually revealed a sense of amusement. Looking at Yang Fan's serious expression, she finally couldn't help but laugh. "You fool! What are you thinking? Who are you? I'm a dignified princess of the Tang dynasty. How can I belong to you? Even if I don't marry, you can't become my husband. You have to understand that it's me who wants you, not you who wants me. It's your fortune that I want you. That's right. I like you. But it's not me being your woman, it's you being my man. Don't you understand the difference?" Yang Fan's face gradually became gloomy, but Princess Taiping took 2 steps back and smiled at him. She coquettishly hooked her finger and said, "Come, serve me. Tonight, I'll let you be as happy as an immortal. Tomorrow I'll give you glory and wealth that you can't fight for in your lifetime." Yang Fan gently bowed and said, "It's late and the princess is drunk. Please rest early. Goodbye." Seeing him turn around and leave, Princess Taiping couldn't help but be startled and angry. "Stop! Where are you going?" Yang Fan didn't stop. He walked to the door and reached out to pull the knocker. Then he turned his head and said seriously, "I believe that if I stay tonight, I'll be very happy. But I also believe that after tonight, I'll be unhappy for the rest of my life. Yang Fan isn't a big shot, but I also have my dignity and my rules." When the door opened, the courtyard was filled with clear light. Yang Fan walked out of the Buddhist temple, where Princess Taiping lived, and walked along the grassy path to his residence. The night was very quiet. The wind swayed the shadows of the trees and the rustling sound of the branches and leaves. As his footsteps got closer and farther, the sound of the insects in the grass also became urgent and stopped. Along the way, Yang Fan's mood gradually calmed down. Even if he wasn't a virgin, it wasn't easy to refuse the invitation of the young, beautiful, and charming princess of the Tang dynasty, the flower of Luoyang Lilingyue. But fortunately, he was able to resist the temptation. If he took this wrong step, he would be like Shui Huai, an eagle in a cage. He would lose himself and could only be, like Shui Huai, maintaining his pitiful self-esteem in the midst of being domineering. In fact, everyone knew that he was just a plaything under the crotch of some rich and powerful woman. A plaything who would really respect you and love you. When she liked you, you were her exclusive property and she wouldn't allow anyone to touch you. When she was tired of you, you were just a broken and old shoe. As for Wan, needless to say, with her temperament, she would definitely leave. With her pride and dignity, would she love a plaything under someone else's knee? As a gigolo, How could he have the face to pursue the woman he loved? For a moment of lust, losing himself, losing his dignity, losing his love, this price was not worth it. Yang Fan let out a long sigh. The last trace of restlessness in his heart also calmed down with this long sigh. If a man didn't have a woman, would he always be a child who wouldn't grow up? To be able to resist a woman, especially a beautiful and enchanting woman, just for the principle in his heart, he seemed to have matured a lot more tonight. Under the bright moonlight, his heart also became as clear and transparent as the moonlight.